God, how could there possibly be 420 anime worth recommending? You're going to find out today, because I watched a lot of anime in the last 20 years, and I know that there are 420 anime that you should see. Wow, that'll keep you busy for like the next 10 years probably. Good luck with that. Have fun with that addiction. I'm Trixie the Golden Witch, ranting, raving Otaqueen, mother of AniTube, and you're in the middle of Vlogust, which is where I do a vlog every single day all month. But this is the one that you're going to remember for the rest of your life, because you're never going to stop coming back here for anime recommendations. I know, because once upon a time I did a 250 plus anime recommendations video. It was like 6 or 7 years ago. I was in a different life and under a different name, and I had to cast that video deep into the abyss. So this is the replacement. Thank me later. Alright. This whole video is going to be broken into categories. You can find time codes in the description that go to each category. I pretty much organized them by what I thought were the most accessible to least accessible categories. And I'm talking about on a broad scale, like not to people who are already anime fans. Like if you want to make someone into anime, start with the stuff at the top here in the drama category, because drama is like the most broadly accessible category of media that there is. It just describes stuff that is not more niche than being human experience dramatized. So the best drama anime I've ever seen is Sangatsu no Lion. March Comes Like a Lion. It's the easiest show for me to recommend. Most of this is going to be in alphabetical order, but I'm putting this at the front because I want you to see it so badly. 50 episodes exist, adapting the still ongoing manga written by Umino Chika Sensei. It is not only compelling human drama starring a shogi player, Japanese chess. You don't really need to know anything about shogi to watch the show. It'll explain whatever you need to know. There's some Japanese cultural affect to the show, but nothing that's too exotic for the average non-Japanese person to comprehend. So I think you could easily, anybody who's like driven to anime as a medium, I'd see no reason you wouldn't be able to connect to the characters in this show. Even if you're older, there are lots of way older characters in this show than you get from almost any other anime, and that has allowed it to age for me so wonderfully, where I could connect to the teen characters. Now as I get older, I can connect more to the older characters. I think it's something that survives generations that way. Umino Chika is one of the best drama writers out there. Her previous work, Honey and Clover, is going to come up not too far later on this list, but Sangatsu no Lion is the most recommendable anime from me. Happens to be also from my favorite anime director, Akiyuki Shinbo, whose experimental style really brings the emotions out of this show. It's animated in a way that would, even though it's a show that like can exist and does exist in live action, the way that it's animated justifies the existence of the medium of animation to me. It expresses so much visually and so much in the audio that couldn't be done in another medium, that I think the anime is a perfect version of the story. Manga is also great, though. All right, next I'm going to start recommending a bunch of kind of similar shows that were adapted from visual novels by a group called Key. You've probably heard of this group. There's a lot of people who groan at even the idea of recommending these shows. They're all they're based on visual novels. There's a type of person who tends to gravitate towards visual novels, and it's the type who has been driven into their room by their anime fantasies, forced to play dating sims on the computer instead of going out with real girls. They're based on dating sim porn games, but the games that Key wrote, much like the games that Type Moon wrote, like Fate Stay Night and stuff like that, are not really known for having amazing porn scenes. They're known for having tear-jerking stories and great characters. The porn scenes are not adapted into their anime adaptations. Most of these are way more accessible teen dramas that, if you're an anime fan in your late teens or even early adulthood, these are shows that will probably make you cry. Air was the first one to come from Kyoto Animation, which in the time since then has become known as like the standard setter for modern animation. They pretty much are constantly raising the bar for how good anime can look, culminating probably in Violet Evergarden as a show that most of you've probably heard of. Air was the first thing that really made an impression with anime fans with how good it looked for its time in 2003. And again, it's a heartfelt story about just a guy in the summer coming to a town, meeting a bunch of cute girls, finding out about their trauma, how that trauma connects to ancient traumas of their ancestors and stuff. Also, the main character turns into a bird. It's a little weird. Kanon was the 2006 adaptation of another light novel from the same, or visual novel from the same creators. Kanon had actually been the first one to get really popular. It had an anime adaptation in 2002 that isn't as easily recommendable, and then had another one in 2006 from, again, Kyoto Animation. This was one of the first anime dramas that really dragged me in when I saw it at like 16 or so, and I was crying over all these cute girls dying in the snow over cancer and fighting invisible aliens and shit. Like, basically each of these shows follows like an arc structure where the main character will date a girl and for like 3 episodes and like get into her backstory, and usually lead to her either dying or resolving her conflict and then kind of becoming like a background character in the rest of the show while he dates the next girl until we get to main girl at the end. It's all like, they're very weirdly structured shows because they are adapted from visual novels where you're allowed to pick multiple routes, like where you're not really meant to play the whole story at once, but more so choose which parts of the story you want to engage with. I guess you could watch these anime that way, but they're structured a little bit more traditionally in the overall story. And the most successful of these has been Clannad. Clannad, with its second season After Story, totals out to like 50 episodes. There's a few OVAs as well. And this is like the ultimate sad high school drama, melodrama type show where like the first arc is about a girl who's like a freshman who's adorable. They want to help her out because her family sucks, but actually she's a ghost and she just wants to see her sister's wedding before she passes on. And then like the next arc will be about like the main character getting his girlfriend pregnant and then like reincarnating as a teddy bear. It's weird. Look, these shows are weird, but they're weird in ways that aren't immediately obvious. They all start off seeming like very tepid, normal, relatable, comedic hijinks, haha, like sitcom type shows, and then all of a sudden they hit you with the cry porn, and that's really what chokes you in. And Clannad After Story in particular gets really serious and really like heartfelt in its messages about family. It's one of the higher rated anime on like any platform that tracks anime by score, so it's even though I've never been a huge fan myself, it's easy for me to recommend because I know most people who watch it end up liking it. There was also a story called Little Busters. It's another adaptation of another game from the same company. This is actually my favorite of them as an anime adaptation. It deals with like time loops and like purgatory and lots of weird concepts. I don't want to like spoil anything by describing like the sci-fi twists that come up. It again seems like just a high school dramedy about like a group of friends hanging out and doing wacky hijinks, falling in love, having misadventures, dealing with family drama, except there's always some kind of like supernatural twist that'll come in every once in a while and then like recontextualize everything to be weird. Yeah, these are all good shows, especially if you're trying to feel something and you're a young adult. These are shows to make yourself cry. Another one that'll make you cry, Angel Beats, based on a light novel series from that same author who did all the key visual novels. But this one is explicitly set in purgatory, where a bunch of characters, they cannot die, but they're like fighting a war against what they perceive as an angel that might like change their fate. Honestly, the story of this, like, it's only 13 episodes long, but it changes so rapidly and has so much lore packed into it that it's hard for me to describe anything without spoiling. It's a really fun bathos-driven show. Like, everything is emotionally over the top, but it changes gears from, like, comedy to drama to horror, like, that just constantly. So not everyone can necessarily relate to that type of, like, emotional extremism from a show, but it feels really heartfelt, and when you get to the last episode, like, I challenge you not to cry watching this show. I challenge you. It's as emotionally manipulative as it could possibly be, and it works. It's also got a bunch of great music that has remained popular over the years. Another adaptation of a work from the same team, another key visual novel that's more recent, is Planetarian. This one got a 5-part original web series, and then a movie that I actually haven't seen yet that's, I think, a sequel or re-summary or something like that. This one takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a very stripped-down story of, like, a guy who's wandering the post-apocalypse rubble, like, looking for supplies, and he happens to come upon a planetarium where there's, like, a robot that is basically built to just exposit about the planetarium. And this guy, he kind of, like, I don't want to say he falls in love with the robot, but he develops a relationship and a sense of caring about this robot in a world where he had long given up on caring about basically anything. And it turns out she is, like, basically the very first of a type of AI that eventually ended up, like, ending the world, and, like, now there's all these fucking super robots out there that you have to fight in order to survive. It goes in a pretty dark and dramatic place, so cry for that one too. All right. That's all for the key visual novels. So if you really don't like teen angst, you should probably avoid all those but Planetarian. But otherwise, they're all fine shows that most people love. Next up, a little bit more experimental in the drama category, is the Aoi Bungaku series. Aoi Bungaku. It is a series of adaptations of, like, classical Japanese novels. So, like, the first 4 episodes are an adaptation of Osamu Dazaki's No Longer Human, which is, like, one of the most famous and influential, like, novels written in the 20th century in Japan. It was a huge influence on lots of light novelists. It's kind of like The Catcher in the Rye of Japan. It's about a troubled youth who attempts a lover's suicide, but ends up not going through with it after she did, and kind of trying to live with that and cope with his trauma of, like, sexual abuse as a child. And it's a fucked up psychological series. They had the character designer of Death Note do the character designs for the anime adaptation, and the guy who directed Gunslinger Girl, which, we'll get to both of those later in this list. But it's a really cool 4-episode adaptation. And then there are 4 more stories that aren't as memorable but still pretty good, adapting other pieces of classical literature. Mostly the No Longer Human adaptation is, like, the reason to watch Aoi Bungaku, but all of them are pretty fun. They're all experimental. They all have different directors. The actual director of Death Note did handle one of the short arcs, I believe. But yeah, it was created by Madhouse, so experimental, high budget, crisp animation, as you would expect. Next up, I'm recommending Asatte no Hoko. This is a somewhat more obscure series. This is sort of like a Freaky Friday story, except instead of switching bodies, the characters switch ages. So a college student, her body becomes like a little girl's, and then the little girl's body becomes like an adult's. And it's about both of them, like, dealing with how their place in life has completely shifted, like whatever they were stressed about or the way that people are handling them totally change based on their different, appearance. And, like, for the young girl, she's just, like, suddenly thrust into all these totally alien expectations to her, whereas the older girl is kind of like escaping a lot of the stuff, or like realizing, like, all the things she set up for herself that don't have as much meaning when people aren't, like, expecting stuff from her. It's been a long time since I watched this anime, and from what I've heard, the manga that goes on a lot longer has, like, a way more, like, sci-fi driven crazy story. I've never read it. I just know that this was a really solid drama that I remember enjoying. Next up is a recent hit, especially if you're a furry. It's Beastars. I love this show. The characters are all, like, anthropomorphic animals going to high school. Well, okay, I shouldn't even say it starts off as like a high school show, but it broadens out to be more of like a whole social commentary and does a lot of world building. Eventually becomes about like the city near the school and about how the students who are like the ace students at the school are going to become part of like the political body of the world around it. So it ends up feeling kind of like an HBO drama, like really in depth on the characterization, really crazy stuff going on that like involves all of society, but like branching out from a murder mystery inside of a high school. And the murder mystery is because of the fact that in this world, carnivores have basically all agreed to go vegan so that they can coexist with herbivores and have a society about it. But, deep down, there's actually like a whole black market and stuff of like secret meat sales, and like the carnivores who are like become serial killers or like can't control themselves. And like broadly the metaphor is like carnivores are like men and like everyone else. It's like a broad rape metaphor, but instead it's about eating each other, and it doesn't have to be male versus female, but it allows like a really interesting lens to be put on like the different social conflicts of like power dynamics and what makes people afraid of each other, and like everything just being so much more explicit because there are some animals that are like craving to eat other animals at all times, and some that just like are just like meek little creatures that are nowhere near the fucking size of these like wolf people walking around. So yeah, it like basically writs large all of the like visceral emotions people have as they're like developing and going into society by making them literally animals, and like bringing out that level, like the lack of control that we would expect from humans, that like that animals have what we call animalistic tendencies that would take over. It just brings all that to the forefront. So I think it makes for super compelling drama. It's really well written. You should definitely check it out. Next up, this is one to trick your mom into crying. Ringing Bell. This is a 1970s Sanrio anime, the company that made Hello Kitty, and they used to make a whole lot of these like full feature films where they would have a cute little character that they make a movie about. Well, Ringing Bell is about a cute little sheep whose whole family gets eaten by a wolf, and so he decides to dedicate his life to taking revenge on the wolf by way of begging the wolf to train him into a badass so they can fight later in life. And it's played completely straight, really dramatic, really serious. You think you're watching like this cute little fucking sheep movie at first, and then you're watching like this hard ass like sports training film about a sheep getting revenge on a wolf. It's pretty cool. It looks really good. All the Sanrio films from the 70s had like in really impressive visuals. So yeah, that's a fun one to sneak up on someone who thinks they're gonna watch something cute. Ooh. On the much more sad, dissociated, dealing with your shit type of drama, Hybane Renmei. I have a whole video about this, part of my anime alphabet series. I went really in depth talking about the themes, talking about why the show was created, what influenced it, and all that. And it's fundamentally a show about loss and grieving. It's a show about faith and having faith in yourself to be able to continue live after losing someone that you love. It explores this in a really fascinating setting with a legendary soundtrack, like this folksy, old-timey feel to it. It's set in like a town that looks like it's from the 1800s, but is actually sort of displaced in time. It's got like a green sky and sort of implied to be purgatory. The main characters are these girls who end up growing angel wings out of their backs and have halos over their head, but all the wings are like charcoal colored, so they're like not quite angels on their way to heaven. Maybe you find out or something by watching the show. Maybe you don't find out shit, but you'll have a good time. Holy fucking shit, I'm a drummer now! Pbk Euphonium is the next anime I'm recommending. This is another high school melodrama, but it's about the girls in a big band, in an orchestra class, as it were. And probably mostly relatable to people who have been through that experience. It's again a Kyoto Animation series, and they went all in on realism, trying to make it sound sound and look like the characters are really playing what they're playing. And it's a show about a group that's trying to compete nationally, and they have a really hard-ass teacher who's like pushing them a little bit nicer than Whiplash style, but it's that type of approach. And so the girls in class are each dealing with basically facing their own talent level or how much they really care about continuing, as well as facing interpersonal conflict and drama within the class. The show continues for a couple of seasons, although each one is sort of conclusive in its own story arcs. And then there's a film and even a side film about some of the side characters called Liz and the Blue Bird. All of them are pretty worth checking out if you like this type of melodrama. There's a heavy lesbian undertones, but it doesn't ever really get explored, so don't go into it expecting that you're going to get Yuri out of it. You will be disappointed. Otherwise, you might have a good time. Although Liz and the Bluebird is explicitly more lesbian. Speaking of LGBT series, Hourou Musuko, or Wandering Sun. I have recommended this a lot of times as basically the ultimate anime about transgenderism. It's the trans show. Particularly the manga goes on a lot longer than the anime does, which is only like a 12 episode adaptation written by Okada Mari sensei, and it focuses on the period when the main characters are in middle school, which is sort of the most melodramatic and driven by interpersonal conflict part of the characters' lives. But the main character is a young trans girl in the process of discovering that fact itself, and surrounding them are lots of people with their own questions about gender, people who seem to be falling into all sorts of different roles. But the series is careful, and I think most successful, because it doesn't label anything. It's not like, this is the trans boy, this is the trans girl, or whatever. Like, it's a manga starting from all of these characters being in elementary school and following them all the way up until adulthood, and like what they end up figuring out for themselves, what they do end up wanting with their lives. So yeah, if you've ever questioned your gender at all, you should probably watch Wandering Sun. It might mean something to you. Next up, I'm recommending The Tale of Princess Kaguya, a Ghibli film from the late great Isao Takahata sensei. I made myself sad remembering that he's gone now, but this was the man who basically made Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli what they are. He was the OG of anime film directors. And Tale of Princess Kaguya was his final work in 2013. 7 years hand-drawn. If you've ever heard that meme phrase, it's because of this film and Redline both having been that way. And this is more the flowery, experimental, it's an adaptation of a classical Japanese myth. It's got a very fairy tale-esque story. If you know Japanese history, this will probably hit a lot harder with you, especially if you're familiar with the story. It's a very feminist tale, a very emotional tale. It's something you kind of have to experience visually to really get the effect of. If you're someone who considers yourself an animation fan, you need to see this film, because the animation is completely insane, and it'll blow your mind, and you'll wonder how they did it. So yeah, check it out. In the same year that the great Takahata put out The Tale of Princess Kaguya, so too did his understudy, the most famous anime director, Hayao Miyazaki, put out what is still up to now his final film, The Wind Rises, and one of my personal favorites. It is a biopic about a guy who designed a whole lot of planes that would fly during World War II and cause a lot of bad things to happen. And it's basically the life story of this guy's autistic obsession with just wanting to make the ultimate plane at whatever cost and whoever would let him do it. He considers it his life's work and this great genius progression of technology. But in the end, it mostly leads to lots of death, including of people around him that he didn't get to spend enough time with while they were there. A lot of the film is influenced by Miyazaki's feelings of loss over his mother, who died of tuberculosis, and him being the ultimate workaholic director, the most perfectionist madman who's never peeled himself off a desk, no matter how many times he says he's going to retire. He poured all of those feelings of regret about being too good at his job into this movie, and it fucking hits. It's a pretty brutal film. One of the things that makes me cry the hardest in anime, for sure. Next up, I'm going to talk about a much more popular movie, one of the most popular animated films ever, in fact. I'm not sure if it's been topped yet, but Your Name. This was the blockbuster summer juggernaut of 2016. It's another teen melodrama, but between a pair of characters who get Freaky Friday, they get body swapped, a boy and a girl, and they one lives in like the countryside and one in the middle of the inner city. So they start discovering each other's lives, and I don't want to spoil the central mystery of the film, but basically their places in life are more complicated than they initially seem. And basically experiencing each other's lives causes these two to fall in love with each other and start seeking each other out in a spiritually driven way. We'll just say there's some supernatural twists going on in this film that don't necessarily make sense, but it's still a really entertaining, it's sort of a 4-quadrant film. It's the type of movie you can't really picture somebody who wouldn't get anything out of it at all unless they're really trying to be contrarian about it. Which is plenty of critics, but not a whole lot of like regular people. So you should probably watch it. Next, I'm going to recommend Kiznaiver. This one might be a little bit more divisive. It's another teen melodrama. It's sort of like Cabin in the Woods, but for anime, where a bunch of teens are like kidnapped into this like this program where basically they're being put through anime cliches to try to make them friends. It's like if the Breakfast Club was fed through Cabin in the Woods. So you got like six high school teens with different personalities being forced into like what on the surface look like death game type scenarios. Like it looks like they're being put through like a Hunger Games or something, but actually it's just like trying to make them come together so that like the school president, who's just like really distant from understanding human emotions and really traumatized, can like try to figure out how to feel again. I think, if I remember, the plot gets a little bit crazy as it goes. But mostly I recommend this show because it looks phenomenal. The character art is just... I actually can't figure out how they animated this show. Like, I've never seen character art this complex animated this fluidly. And usually when you're trying to make a show with more fluid animation, you tone down the complexity of the designs. Kiznaiver really pushes the envelope in that sense. I think out of everything, Studio Trigger, being a studio really known for their visual spectacle and for like pushing the envelope on the way things are presented, has been undercredited for this show that I still think is like one of the best looking TV anime ever made. And a lot of people kind of look down on it for just being like a teen melodrama type thing. But if that genre ever clicks with you, I think you should give this show a shot, because I think it goes a little deeper. Kiznaiver is the idea is that kizuna is a Japanese word that means bonds and wounds. So people are bonded by their wounds, and that's the theme of the show. If that sounds interesting, you should watch it. Next up, Koe no Katachi, or A Silent Voice. This is a film from Kyoto Animation that looks absolutely stunning, and it's the story of a deaf girl in elementary school being bullied by an insecure boy, and then later in life when they meet again, he's changed a lot. He himself has gone through bullying and therapy, and meets her again and wants to repair his relationship and help her out with her life, because things are hard for a deaf girl. And so it sort of explores their teen drama. It's a 5-volume manga that's sort of been cut down a little bit for the movie, so if you find yourself loving this film, you would probably want to read the manga to get a more complete story. But the film looks so goddamn incredible. Very few things in animation look as good as this film, and the director is also responsible for shows like Kanon and Tamako Love Story, which I think have solidified her place along with this film as probably the most noteworthy new face in anime since 2010. So like Naoko Yamada pretty much owned the 2010s as like the director to be watching. Like the Clouds, Like the Wind is a really odd hour-long film from, I think, 1991 that I'm mostly recommending because you can find it easily on streaming services like VRV. And it's a story of a girl who, like, comes to the prince to try to, like, become a concubine. Like, she's in the running to be the latest new wife of like the king or the prince or whatever. And it's just like a simple story of this girl, like, going to the capital, meeting all the other candidates, and then, like, some crazy shit happens that just totally upheaves everything that was going on politically. So yeah, it's a weird story, but it's fun. The characters are likable and it looks really good. So if, like, that type of like off-kilter political dramedy sounds like your type of thing, watch this one. Getting back into Ghibli mode with another classic from Hayao Miyazaki, Kiki's Delivery Service. Pretty much the most noteworthy witch anime out there. Kiki's a young girl who comes from a witch family, and when witches basically are coming of age, when they're in their teens, they have to fly off and find a city to, like, be the witch of that city. So Kiki, she wants to be the witch of, like, a cool hip city, so she flies off to what, for the time of, like, it's probably set in, like, the 20s or 30s. It's like when they're still whenever blimps were invented. Like, blimps are new at the time of this movie and exciting. So yeah, like, Kiki flies into a blimp having town and meets this kid who's, like, he's trying to put a propeller on his bike and fly with it, and he's like a little nerd that she falls in love with, and she works at a bakery for a while. It's a very slice of lifey film, but the main core heart of it, when you get deep into it, is Kiki dealing with depression, and the depression not allowing her to do magic. And she ends up meeting an artist woman in the woods who basically, you know, metaphorically is like, hey, you've got writer's block or artist block, so, like, you know, you gotta not be sad or else you can't make good shit. And that's how she gets better at the magic. It's in the end. It's a heartfelt story, reaches a lot of people. I've felt differently every time I've watched it. I can't ever decide if it's, like, amazing or, like, the lesser Miyazaki film. But, you know, a lot of people are going to shit on me even for just suggesting that. So you should probably watch the movie. Staying in the realm of Ghibli films, this one was actually written by Miyazaki, though not directed by him. Whisper of the Heart. If you are a young artist struggling, you need to watch this film. It's about you. It's about your experience. The main character is a young woman who is introduced. Actually, she's trying to write a Japanese translation of the song Take Me Home Country Roads, the English song. I had an unfortunate theater experience where people wouldn't stop laughing every time that song played in the movie, but the song Take Me Home Country Roads is essential to this film. It's really good. Basically, this girl ends up romantically involved with a guy who himself is a musician and very good and wants to go to school in another country to practice it. And it's basically a film endorsing the grind. It's a movie about how, like, if you want to get good at something, you're going to have to basically fuck up everything else in your life and just worry about this one thing until you're good at it. And treating that as, like, a very positive trait, even with the struggles it creates for your family. So yeah, Whisper of the Heart, young artists, this will help you understand what you're in for if you watch it. Next up, I'm recommending Mirai of the Future. This is a strange movie. Comes from director Mamoru Hosoda, who did The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Summer Wars and The Boy and the Beast, and most recently Belle. He's one of the most, like, popular directors in recent years. And Wolf Children, which is probably his most popular movie and most accessible. But this one, I think it's accessible if you don't mind that the movie is weird. But it's about a family that lives in this really fucking cool house that someone's, like, specifically brought in, like, an architect was brought in to design the house that they have in this movie that has this open floor, like 3 floors, but you can see from the top to the bottom so that you can watch your kids. Because it's a movie about, like a 2-year-old kid and his experience of this, like, magical tree in the middle of their house that remembers their whole family's, like, history. And so as he interacts with this tree, his sister, who right now is a baby, like a newborn baby, from the future as a 15-year-old is coming back to like, I don't remember if she's like trying to, I don't remember what she's trying to help about the kid. I don't know if he like killed himself or something, but she's trying to save her brother while he's a baby by coming back from the future through the tree as a teenager, even though she's actually currently, from his perspective, the baby. Yeah, it's a weird movie. It's got some furry undertones, but it's ultimately about genealogy, about looking at your family history. If you're somebody who's into family trees, this is a movie for you. Let's put it that way. If you think genealogy is cool, watch Mirai of the Future. Or if you're just a big animation dork, it's a weird movie that has cool visuals, so you should watch it for that reason. Next up, I'm recommending you a really hard drama, Nana. This manga is one of the most famous manga for women of the 2000s. The anime adaptation is not a complete telling of the manga story. And it doesn't end in like a happy place. It just kind of ends where it ends, and things were very dark in the story at that time. So I'm going to warn you, if you watch this show, it's incredibly good. You will love the characters. You'll cry. You'll take a whole journey with Nana and Nana, the two girls named Nana, one of them being like normie pink princess girl who dates all the hottest guys in school, and then the other is like dark gothic. Yeah, she's the lead singer of a punk band, Nana, and the two of them meet and they become best friends because they're so opposite, and then they become roommates, and it's about like normie Nana like helping her friends to become like a famous band, and then the band blows up, but their fucking lives are always dramatic and everything sucks for them. Nice Nana gets pregnant. Well, she's not even the nice one. Actually, the goth one's the nice one. The other Nana gets pregnant with the kid of a fucking douchebag from like a more famous band, and it all starts falling apart and goes to hell. It's a show that's at once incredibly inspirational. The characters are lovable. You want to be like them. You want to have their successes. You don't want to have their failures. And that's the scary part. The show really dives into the characters' failures as it goes, and then it ends before ever like resolving or getting to a satisfying place. So that's my warning to you. Nana, worth watching, will ruin your life. Wow, now I'm Trans-American President Loki, and I'm still going to be recommending you more of these drama anime, such as... Well, I lost my place. When Marnie Was There, another one of Studio Ghibli's films. This one comes from director Yonebayashi, who only did a couple of movies there before he ended up founding a whole new studio, Studio Chizu, which has basically carried on the Ghibli spirit, making films that are very easily mistakable for Ghibli films if you don't know the difference. But When Marnie Was Here is a cute film. It's kind of like that meme about how girls with a time machine will go back and like be like, I'm your granddaughter. Oh, really? It's like that, but like as a soft drama played out with like an outcast girl moving to a seaside town where like there's this mysterious old house on the cliff that she can boat to and talk to a girl who's sort of displaced in time. I probably gave away too much of the plot, but it's a cute movie. Maybe you'll like it. Only Yesterday is a film from Isao Takahata from 1991 that is about a girl's upbringing as an awkward child who struggled through the 60s with a family that didn't really approve of the way that she just is in general, trying to help correct her behavior as a suburbanite child. And her memories of being a kid are intercut with a excursion that she takes as a 35-year-old from her job in the city to go out to the countryside and hang out with some family who run a farm. And as she spends time out there, she learns some stuff about... It's Touch Grass, the movie. Like, basically, she goes and touches grass and then figures out what being a human is like. The message of the movie is pretty squarely aimed at, like, the type of people who would be watching anime films to be like, hey, this is you. Go outside. And I approve of that message. Wolf Children is another film from Mamoru Hosoda, who I'm sure I brought up on this list at least once already, but he is one of the more accessible film directors, and this one is the ultimate mom movie. It is a movie about a woman who falls in love with a werewolf and ends up with two werewolf children, And they're a type of werewolf that can sort of like freely transform back and forth, or even between like different aspects. Like they can like 50% transform into a wolf type shit. So they can be anywhere on the furry spectrum. But early into the film, tragedy strikes, and it becomes a motherhood film through and through, as the kids age into adolescence and have to, you know, deal with the problems of being different and strange and like kind of more wolf than children sometimes. Another director whose films are easy to recommend to anyone that likes movies in general is Satoshi Kon, and his film Millennium Actress might be the most accessible and thrilling to watch for newcomers to animation. It tells the story of a documentary filmmaker going to an old actress's house to talk about her life story and just like capture it all before she dies. And as she's telling that story, it becomes interwoven with the plots of the movies that she starred in, and visually the characters are like imposed into the scenes from those movies, but like the movies are being reinterpreted to fit like what actually happened to her situation. So the whole thing has this like dream logic weirdness to it that all comes together in the end in a brilliant package. All of Satoshi Kon's films are trippy and you know, often require multiple viewings to fully get everything that's going on. And this is one of the most entertaining and easily watchable. Getting back to TV anime, one of the most interesting and prestigiously animated of the 2010s was Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, a show about the Japanese comedy storytelling style called Rakugo. It's hard to really describe without you watching a performance for yourself or watching the show in order to get a sense of what the performances are like. But basically it's like suspenseful comedy horror storytelling that's done on a stage at a time before radio kind of took over and made it an irrelevant medium. And this story takes place over the course of multiple generations. We're introduced to a main character as he's walking out of prison in like I want to say the 50s or 60s, and then the story flashes back like 10 years earlier than that to talk about his the guy who like trained him, his upbringing as a comedian. So like it's a multi-generational story across 2 seasons, fraught with interpersonal drama and crazy character turns. I would say that I was less interested specifically in the story of this anime even than how it is presented, where there's these lengthy performance scenes where characters are like where we like see whole Rakugo performances for like minutes on end with really lavish animation, and like we really through the directing get a sense of what's different about these performances, what makes each of them special, and it feels magnetic. You feel like you're watching like a great performance in a way that only animation could really communicate, even though this is based on a manga. You know, it has its own way of handling the idea of a live performance as put through, you know, a reproducible visual medium. So yeah, it's cool. It's a good show. It's worth checking out. Next up, the follow-up to the ever-popular Makoto Shinkai film Your Name was Weathering with You, another sort of apocalyptic romance story, but this one with a troubled youth who stumbles his way into the big city. He's trying to create a new life for himself. He falls in love with this girl who is able to stop the rain, and they end up creating a business out of stopping the rain, and eventually people start really wanting to use her as a sacrifice to stop the rain from drowning out Tokyo. And the film's position on what should be done is pretty interesting, and I think it's ultimately a movie that's supposed to like absolve the youth of guilt of having to worry about how fucked the world has already been by their forebears. It's an interesting movie, and it's really gorgeous to look at. Definitely will please most people who would see a trailer and want to watch it. One of my favorite underrated anime films, Mamoru Oshii's The Skycrawlers. Oshii, who directed Ghost in the Shell, is known for sort of slower, contemplative thinky films, and this is the slowest, most contemplative, most thinky of the bunch. So, you know, if you don't like slow movies, this might not be for you. It does have some crazy aerial combat scenes that were done by like the Ace Combat game animation team or something like that. So like there's some cool plane action you could watch on YouTube if you just want to see that. But otherwise, it's a story about these like adolescent pilots being forced into like this forever war that exists, you know, for the sake of its own profitability, and just the nihilism that springs up from being like raised pretty much just for the purpose of being a soldier in a war you know is pointless. And attempting to find any kind of meaning in a situation like that. It's definitely an absurdist fantasy version of like a modern war idea. There's some sci-fi twists I don't want to spoil, so, you know, check that one out. I Can Hear the Sea, or Umi ga Kikoeru, is one of the lesser-known Studio Ghibli films from a director who only worked with them once, but has done some pretty alright work. And this one is a young adult drama that I would highly recommend to like graduating high schoolers or college students who aren't really sure where they want to go with the next step of their life. This is a film about that kind of existential questioning of your future and your path and whether you're really doing what you want to do. It's fairly conventional. It was made as like a TV movie, so it's not like a crazy mind-blowing fantasy like you might expect from most Ghibli films, but if you like young adult drama, this is worth watching. There's also a nostalgic element to it where there's like a time skip, so I think older viewers could still get something out of it, but it's been a long time since I watched it, so I can't detail that any further. Next up, Usagi Drop. A lot of people feel a lot of ways about this because the manga continues beyond the anime in a way that most people don't like very much, and I'll just tell you, you know, don't even look into it. Don't even, unless you're so morbidly curious that you think it couldn't possibly be ruined for you. But anyway, this is a story about a guy who, at the wake of his, I think, like, grandfather, ends up adopting one of his nieces or cousins, just like a young girl from his family. And basically, this guy whose life is 2-hour commutes in and out of Tokyo every day to do like a wage slave job for no purpose starts to find some sense of, you know, like spark of life after having like a kid around. So it's mostly like a parenting type story, but the manga has a time skip. And a lot of people don't like the way that the story went. So, you know, if you want to see some cute stuff that'll restore your faith in humanity, and you'll be like, yeah, people are helpful to each other in times of need. It's a good anime for those feelings. Not the manga. One of the big hit shows of the late 2010s from Kyoto Animation, Violet Evergarden, is the story of a child soldier whose arms get like blown off and replaced with like automail arms, and so she starts working for a letters company, a place where mostly ladies are composing letters for customers and typing them out on typewriters. And because of the fact that her hands are so good, she can type really fast, and that part of the job she's great at. But because she's a child soldier, she has no sense of empathy or understanding of human emotions. So her attempt to transcribe what people are telling her ends up being so like cutthroat and harsh that she can't really do the job well. So it becomes about her journey to like understand people well enough to be able to write on their behalf through like reading countless books, going on travels, helping out different people, and the more letters she writes, the better she gets at it. So it's a really interesting story with a like Victorian-esque setting. Like there's trains, but not really much technology. Better than that, I guess it's like World War II type era. But yeah, like it's set in Europe, or like a fictionalized Europe. it feels like you're just watching a bunch of fancy Europeans, but you're actually in like a fantasy world. There's lots of undercurrent lore that goes on, but because the story is like so far like a season of anime and a couple of movies, it hasn't expanded on like the full depth of what like potential there seems to be for this thing to just keep going and having more parts. Unfortunately, there was an arson attack on Kyoto Animation that set back, aside from the fact that like 35 people lost their lives, everyone else lost their livelihood and work for the last like 5 years. So it's been a lot of build up to get back to a point where we even know if Violet Evergarden can keep going forever like it was obviously meant to. But it's a great anime. You should watch it. Give your support to that studio. This next film, Akko's Inn, is about a young girl whose parents like die and she ends up having to live and work for this big old Japanese style inn as like somebody just, kind of like spirited away, like wiping the floors, doing all this the house stuff and meeting people who come through and enriching their lives in her own. It's a very episodic story based on like a longer running manga. Sort of a kid friendly but very dramatic story. Like if you wanted to show your kids something like that might like if your kid's like really like well read or something and looking for like emotional depth in their movies, is like a really fucking smart 10-year-old, show them this movie. They might like it. I don't know. It's a weird one. It's hard to know who to recommend it to, but I've known a few people who consider it one of their favorites, and I enjoyed it. So check it out. The Night is Short, Walk On Girl is a film from a art house legend, Masaaki Yuasa, director and writer who's just compiled like a whole lot of the best anime of the 2010s, like Kaiba, the Tatami Galaxy. That one in particular comes from being based on a novel from the same author as The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, and has a very similar visual style. So if you're already familiar with that anime, highly recommend this one. This one hit me even harder because it's about a young woman who's very free-spirited, who spends her night going out on the town and just drinking with everybody and letting the night take her where it takes her. And it tells sort of three different segments of stories about different characters and their experience of this like extremely long night that couldn't possibly all be one night, but it's like this like distorted reality of a single event that just keeps going. I really like it. I recommend getting drunk and watching it if you drink already. The last thing I'm going to recommend in this first category is Young Blackjack, which is a prequel to a massive monolithic blackjack franchise created by Osamu Tezuka, the godfather of manga, the guy who created like the biggest franchises that made manga a popular thing in Japan. And Blackjack is about a surgeon who goes rogue because he loses his ability to participate in mainstream doctoring. This is the story of how that happens. So like if you've never heard of Blackjack, actually a great starting point, Young Blackjack tells the story of him being in medical school, getting involved in all kinds of political conflict that's going on around the Vietnam War, and how him like helping the wrong people put him in the predicament of being like exiled from the medical community and becoming Blackjack, the guy who's known for like charging 2 million yen or whatever for him to work for you because he's like, an outlandish outside the unlicensed, that's the word I'm looking for, an outlandish unlicensed practitioner that only works for like rich people that he can fuck over. It's a good story. Well, now I'm like a Tokyo Wakazukin or something, and I'm going to recommend you even more anime. These are a couple of what I've categorized specifically as heavy drama. If you thought, wait, I watched some of those dramas, some of that was pretty heavy. There was death, there was loss, there was grief. Well, what about war? How about World War II and the unique perspective of the country that was bombed to hell during that war? Well, I've got a back-to-back double feature of trauma, cultural trauma for you. First of all, Grave of the Fireflies. This film from Isao Takahata and Studio Ghibli, pretty infamous for being like one of the most depressing anime that exists. A lot of people have difficulty connecting with this film because of the fact that it doesn't have a lot of sympathetic characters. It's not a likable experience. It's dark and tragic and complicated and heavily nuanced in a way that's not favorable to anybody. It's very much not a film celebrating Japan's place in any of what's happening or anyone's place in any of what's happening. It's just a miserable reflection on basically the death of the entire cultural identity that existed in Japan up until that point. How, like, losing World War II pretty much just ended what Japan stood for like the generation that was coming up, until the bombings happened. And if you really want to get heavy into the bombings themselves, of course, there's the classic Barefoot Gen, based on a classic manga. It was adapted into a 1980 film, 1980 something 3 or something like that. And you see the bomb go off in this movie, my friends, and you see all of the horrific effects of what that did to people, abstracted only through animation, but not so much that you can't. If you had to see this in real life, it would be mentally scarring more so than, I think a lot of people have been scarred just from even seeing these adaptations of what happened in real life, but it gives you, like, even the slightest perspective into just how much worse it might be to have actually experienced that stuff in real life, as did, the survivors of World War II, who largely ended up creating the anime industry. Most of the early manga authors were like 9 or 10 when World War II happened. So, it was mostly people growing up in a completely new attempt at having a culture and borrowing it mostly from, Western influences that even in spite of the fact that, like, those were the very influences that, like, destroyed what they had in the first place. Japan's history is crazy, and these films will make you really feel a lot of things about it. Next up is the category of sci-fi drama. Specifically, these are not what I would consider sci-fi works fundamentally. They're not aiming first and foremost to, like, tell an elaborate, crazy story about, like, a futuristic world. They're more so dramas that use some kind of sci-fi slant to, like, comment on human nature. So, for instance, the first one I'm going to recommend is The Time of Eve, or Eve no Jikan, which is about a world where there are AI, like, house robots that help people with, like, everyday life activities, or go on dates with them, or, like, fulfill all these basic duties, but they're fairly low level AI. They're not, like, super convincing as people, so a lot of people treat them as though they are not people. And there's a cafe in which the one rule is that whoever's in there has to be treated the same. You cannot treat robots as if they're not people inside this cafe. And it ends up being mostly a commentary on domestic abuse. And it's literally a movie about a safe space for abuse victims that happen to be robots. But most of the situations are, like, pretty commonplace, and the emotions being commented on are, like, stuff that people are really dealing with in the real world. So the sci-fi slant is just really an abstraction to help face some, like, really complicated emotions that would be harder to face if it wasn't an anime robot, dealing with the suffering. Next up, Metropolis. This is Osamu Tezuka, godfather of manga's, take on the 1920s German film from Fritz Lang. So if you've seen that movie, a lot of cinephiles might have. It's a silent film with really epic sets and cinematography that was incredibly expensive. Tezuka, just being inspired by it, created a story once more about AI and how human they are, but in this case framed more in the traditional cyberpunk, like, way of a caste debate, where there's, like, robots that are in high society, robots that are in low society, and there's sort of a low society uprising that's in the process over the torment of robot kind. And meanwhile, there's, like, a love story playing out alongside that. It's a complicated movie with a lot of moving parts and really crazy visual design and cinematography. That's sort of more the standout aspect. There's a lot of blending of 2D and 3D that doesn't always age perfectly, but there's lots of really gorgeous scenes in this movie. And overall, I think if you like cyberpunk and you like the look of this film, you should give it a shot. Infinite Revius is often described as the Lord of the Flies in space. I've never read that book, but it's a story about a bunch of kids who are cadets on a spaceship. They're like a whole generation of like bright young kids who are supposed to be learning how to run a spaceship soon, and then all the adults get like vanished away. Basically, the kids end up having to run the space station, and it's a bunch of adolescents with a bunch of pent-up adolescent angst all flying around. It's a great human drama. It's basically a show about like how society ends up being founded. You know, a bunch of people realizing the way the world works by way of suddenly being in the real world when they had previously just been in school, essentially, and you know, having all of the responsibilities thrust onto them to do anything about survival and find a way home and feed everybody and make sure that, you know, they're not literally raping and killing each other in the middle of the fucking hallways. So yeah, it goes to dark places. It's a drama, a heavy one, but in space. Next up, Planets. This one is a 2-volume manga that's really excellent, and also a 26-episode anime adaptation that stretches the story, adds some stuff into it, adds more characters, and is also just an incredibly lifelike human drama for being a sci-fi series. Whereas like Cowboy Bebop was known for looking very real in spite of being like a dreamlike universe, Planets actually just feels like it's set in our future, but on space stations, there are people whose job is just to collect debris, because every time something breaks in space, the debris is just there, floating around, and it takes like one screw going through the window of a space shuttle to completely fucking destroy it. So it's a show about being trash people in space and the way that you're treated by society by having that kind of job. The fact that like even though it's something that's like necessary and literally saving lives, nonetheless is like low paying, and all the people are kind of like broken. And I guess I would say it's like a more normal blue collar version of like the Cowboy Bebop type universe. So if you wanted to see something like really down to earth and relatable in spite of being sci-fi, this is a show to go to. Techno Lies is one of the darkest, grimmest, most nihilistic, most void-gazing experiences you could get out of anime. Coming from writer Chiaki Konaka and designer Yoshitoshi Abe, who worked together to realize Serial Experiments Lane, this story is set largely in an underground city where everything is run by gangs. There's lots of just like people fucking like downtrodden in the streets. Gangs are often like collecting people's limbs and shit, and the main character is a boxer who accidentally kills opponents in matches he's supposed to be throwing and gets his arm and leg cut off by mafiosos. But then he's picked up off the streets and his limbs are replaced with Techno Lies, which is like a super futuristic new limb stuff, and he ends up working for a gang boss, but he's kind of just like a directionless, quiet ball of rage, a very Guts-like protagonist, just like a dark, brooding figure who doesn't really understand what the fuck is going on in this world around him. As it goes on, we learn more sci-fi twists. We eventually see what the surface world looks like, and how the setting could be considered almost post-apocalyptic. This story ends about as darkly as Devilman does. So if you really feel grim and nihilistic, there was one time I had a really bad Denny's experience, and I really just needed to watch Techno Lies about it for 8 straight hours. So if you're ever in that kind of state of mind, this is the thing to go to. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time is a very cute film from director Mamoru Hosoda, who I've talked about a few times before. His films are very accessible, and this was the one that kind of blew him up. It is a teen drama about a high school girl who discovers a time travel device that lets her loop back back through like set periods of time a certain number of times. There's like a number limit that she can see. And so she starts just, you know, having fun with this power, eventually facing some consequences for it, figuring out what the source of it is, and you know, having interpersonal drama surrounding both her romantic interests and how they play into her powers. So yeah, it's a nice little YA like sci-fi cute romance story. Twilight Q is a 2-episode OVA that was meant to go on a lot longer. Unfortunately, the OVA boom kind of died around this time. That was supposed to be that was meant to be anime's answer to the Twilight Zone. They wanted to bring in like a different artsy director every time and do some kind of weird story. And the first episode of Twilight Q honestly wasn't that memorable. It came from the same writer as Ocean Waves, which I talked about earlier, and it was just okay. But the second one from Mamoru Oshii, the Ghost in the Shell director, and Skycrawlers, which I talked about a bit ago, is a much more interesting, really dynamically animated and imagined story about basically a guy holed up in his room with his young daughter writing newspaper articles and having musings about the outside world while mostly communicating to it through television. It's hard for me to describe because it's pretty abstract in presentation. But if you generally like experimental, like interesting, different anime, this one's cool. It's got a nice sci-fi twist to it. Again, it would be spoilers for me to go into too much detail because it's only a 30-minute special. Rounding out the sci-fi drama category is the Tatami Galaxy. This is the ultimate college experience show. It's about an unnamed protagonist who, in the first episode, experiences 2 whole years of college in which he joins a club, never really makes any friends, pines after a girl that he really likes and has a strong connection with, but never really ends up making a move on because he spends too much time with this other weird, psychotic incel imp guy who wants him to like fuck with people instead. And at the end of 2 years, he ends up like dying and then resetting, and we experience those 2 years all over again, but if he joined a different club and made slightly different decisions. And basically this character is trapped in like a 4th dimensional prison of trying to figure out what the fuck he's doing in college and why. And it tends to resonate with a lot of people who have had that experience. It gets really weird and trippy in like the midsection. There's a whole arc about a guy who's like obsessed with his real doll and like dressing her up, but he's like a Chad at school, and like almost, God, reminds me of Euphoria now that I'm describing the plot, but with like way trippier visuals and a monologue that honestly, if you struggle to read subtitles, you might not be able to watch this show because the main character talks at the speed of light and there is not a dub. So just be warned that this sounds like the fastest inner monologue ever being spoken out loud, sometimes even sped up to cram a sentence into fit with the timing of the animation. Next, we're moving into romance and relationship drama. And I know that some of the stuff I talked about in the drama category has a lot of romance and relationship drama in it, but here I want to focus on stuff that is just about romance and relationships without any other real focus at all, if that's specifically what you're looking for from your drama. 5 centimeters per second is the film that really put Makoto Shinkai, the guy who did Your Name and Weathering with You, on the map as a director to look out for, because it's 3 short films actually compiled into like an hour and 20-minute long tone piece about this relationship fatalized by distance. It's kind of the ultimate movie about that feel when you move away from a girl you really liked and you can't ever really quite get over it, but eventually you just kind of have to because like 15 fucking years have passed and you've basically forgotten by now. The whole first part of the movie is about these kids who like met in elementary school. They have like a romantic fling in middle school right before the guy moves away. When he gets into high school, there's a girl who likes him, but he's always kind of distant because he's still hoping, like, you know, still pining over the one that he met in middle school. And then when he finally moves like to the city, which is the same city she lives in, they just kind of never run into each other. And there's a whole montage of like 10 years of life of that happening. And I'm spoiling this whole movie, but that's because like if any of that sounds like it resonates with you, I mean, this is a movie just to like sit in that feeling. It's got very gloomy monologued overdubbed dialogue, and the ending bit is like a music video. So yeah, it's really more about sitting with a feeling and looking at a lot of really pretty images that Makoto Shinkai drew, probably mostly by himself, for an hour and a half. Next up, Dokyusei, or Classmates, is the best specifically gay anime film that I've ever seen. It's about high school gay romance, takes place across 4 seasons, the developing relationship between 2 guys who've got other things going on in their lives, and they're trying to manage having a relationship and doing other things and just kind of being there for one another. It's well written and really well animated. The characters like move with tons of emotion. I just think this is a film from a newbie director who I really want to look out for going into the coming decade. If they end up doing anything else, I'll want to know about it, because this was a strong fucking start. And if you have been looking for like a competently made gay romance anime film, this is the best one to me. Next up, F, A Tale of Memories. This is a visual novel adaptation that meant a lot to me when I saw it in my late teens, as it is undercurrently a story about a couple of young artists who are trying to manage like being a teenager against trying to like aspire towards a type of career and lifestyle that like most people don't relate to, and like the push and pull of having like a relationship that could pull you into like a sustainable normal lifestyle, or like dating a crazy bitch but she really likes doing your dishes and she'll let you do manga for a job, and another character who like wants to be a filmmaker. There's just a lot of like inspiring dialogue, really well crafted scenes, really great over the top emotional bits, and overall it's the type of show that makes you feel like, I can follow my dreams if you're somebody who like needs that kind of push like I did at that age. There's also a second season, F, A Tale of Melodies. I never finished it. It deals with rape. It was a little much for me when I was a teenager, but it's the even more dramatic sequel if you want to really burrow into the heart of the drama. Another classic manga that I'm going to recommend, even though I'm not extremely familiar with it, I have seen parts of each adaptation, is Fruits Basket. It had a adaptation in the early 2000s that was incomplete but still beloved by many because of the directing style, and then was restarted in 2018 and brought all the way to completion across like 70-something episodes or something like that. Telling the full story of the manga, which was one of the biggest hits with young girls when manga blew up in the United States in the early 2000s. This was like the most findable shoujo manga in like American libraries for all time. And the fact that the story has finally been completed, if you're somebody who like maybe didn't know that and has heard of this, there's a whole ass anime adaptation now. So from what I saw, it was enjoyable. It's a story about a family who all can transform into like animals based on the Chinese zodiac, and about basically their family drama, and this girl who ends up involved with it because she's homeless at the start of the series, and basically gets picked up by this rich family to like, hey, you can come live here if you clean our place, and then she just ends up involved in their lives and the stuff they've got going on. This was like one of the big shipping shows of the early 2000s. So if you want to see, if you want a show where you can really ship a whole lot of pretty boys, this is the show for you. Speaking of shipping pretty boys, Given is another really good gay romance anime. This one is about a band. It's sort of like Kanon, but with boys. It's very mellow, relaxed, cute. The characters are adorable and very fun to watch, particularly the main guy. He's sort of this like ditzy, dissociated, traumatized, adorable kid who like the hard ass guitarist, like the jazz influenced like real musician starts wanting to work with, because he realizes that he's like innately talented and is like, hey, you could be in our band. Also, he has like an amazing voice, so he ends up being the vocalist of like what had previously been like an instrumental math rock band, basically, until they they realize that, like, this pretty boy can sing, and also I might be in love with him. So yeah, big yaoi energy. Ultimately, really cute romance show. Honey and Clover is a little bit more broad. This comes from the same author as Sangatsu no Lion, which I recommended at the very start of the video as like the most recommendable anime. But if all that Japanese chess was a little bit much for you, maybe Honey and Clover would be a better start. This is another college student anime. It follows a main character through most of his college experience across, like, I want to say 6 years. And basically, it's a journey of discovery for a young artist, finding his voice, having relationship drama with other people. It's really, like, kind of complicated because there's just a bunch of characters having on and off relationships. It's like watching Friends, basically, across, if all the seasons and all the actual drama that's in Friends was compressed way more tightly into the show. If there was, like, only as much comedy as there is stuff that will make you cry, and if the characters were a little deeper. So yeah, there's been live action adaptations of Honey and Clover as well that are pretty respected. If you like this type of drama, there's no reason to think you wouldn't enjoy both the live action and the animated versions and the manga, because that one ends, and I don't know if Honey and Clover season 2 ends. I don't remember. Wow, I'm outside now. If you hear Chainsaw Man in the background, don't be alarmed. It's just the Chainsaw Man debut. That's probably an anime I would recommend if it was out by the time this video came out. Anyway, next up on my list of romances is Kare Kano, my personal favorite of all the teen romantic comedy shows out there. His and Her Circumstances, based on a long-running shoujo manga and adapted by director Hideaki Anno, the guy who directed and created Neon Genesis Evangelion. And he puts a really unique touch on the art style and presentation of this show that apparently the original creator didn't appreciate all that much or something. There's videos out there about, like, the more specific details of why Anno ended up not directing the show all the way through, why it didn't continue past the first season. I think a lot of it just had to do with the fact that Studio Gainax, it seems like a really shitty place to work in the late 90s, going by the stories that Anno has told since then. So yeah, complicated circumstances led to this show not being as complete as one might like, and the last few episodes aren't as great as the incredible first 18 episodes, but nonetheless, the characters in this show, basically the two smartest students in school, one of them comes from a rich, very disciplined family that is sort of abusive and standoffish, whereas the other one, the girl, comes from this very tight-knit family that grew up poor but has, excelled through hard work all their lives, and the two of them immediately dislike each other, but then end up meeting one another and, like, coming to appreciate what's interesting about each other, and eventually, uniting their families. And it's very much a show about the power of a family, the power of love, and the power of relationships to help two people to like themselves more and to get more out of life. It's just a really good rom-com. Next up, Koikaze. This is a 13-episode, very low-key romantic drama about a preposterously morally bad relationship, because it's about a, like, 27 or something like that year old guy who meets a 16-year-old girl on a Ferris wheel and ends up falling for her before finding out that she's his long-lost younger sister, and they take this dramatically seriously and go all the way with it. So if you want to see a taboo relationship just played out very straight-facedly and dramatically, this is that show. It's probably the most realistic feeling attempt at a guy falls in love with his little sister show. Another age difference romance, Koe wa Amai Garu no Yoni. I don't remember what that translates to. After the Rain, I think, is the English title they went with. Is about a young woman who starts working at a diner and ends up falling in love with a much older man who works there and already has a child of his own. And the first 12 episodes don't really make much progress into this relationship. They're very tepid about the age difference and the fact that each of them has complications in their own lives. But, it's basically about a young woman having that thirst for I'm trying to think of what term I want to use. Oyaji moe. That Oyaji moe thirst. Yet another age difference romance. I don't know how all these got in a row like this, but the next one is Garden of Words. This one's from director Makoto Shinkai, the guy who did Your Name and 5 centimeters per second, which we've already talked about. This is his most gorgeous film visually, in my opinion. It is about 45 minutes long, absolutely stunning visually, mostly set in like a central park in Tokyo, and it's about a high school student who's aspiring to basically like drop out and be a shoemaker because all he cares about is making shoes all day. And his teacher, a teacher at his school that he doesn't initially realize is a teacher at his school who is reconsidering her own life choices and ends up meeting him on a bench in the park. There's a lot of foot fetishism in this movie because he's like making shoes for her, and so he's like feeling up her feet and stuff. It's, you know, it's a pretty, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Saucy? You know, it's got the sauce, even though it's played very straight. It's another one of these, like, kind of, very fancy, emotive, emotional takes on what is undercurrently, like, a fetishistic prospect of a, like, hey, what if you got to feel your teacher's feet? And then you have like a shitty romance about it and cry. Hey, here's a movie for you. Lastly, I've got a big, huge Yuri series to recommend here. If you want to see very chaste Christian girls at a Christian school falling in love with one another and exploring their emotions, mostly through subtle looks and gestures and, emotional music. This is like the most feminine lesbian show that has ever existed. Maria Watches Over Us. It's about a Catholic girls' school in which the girls are all paired off in sister groups. So you've always got like an upperclassman and a younger classman that are like grouped up and then have to like go through school together and eventually like, become a mentor themselves in the last year. And so there's like a bunch of obvious pairings of like girls having to explore emotions together at different levels of lesbian undercurrent, some of it explicit, much of it only implied, but it goes on forever. There are like 5 seasons of this anime. It's a long-running light novel series, hugely influential on all the Yuri that would come after it, most of which went in the direction of just being more raunchy than this one. So if you want to see the most like toned down and like just writerly version of one of those shows, here's the one for you. That's it for the romance section, so let's go over there and talk about thrillers. Gankutsuo, The Count of Monte Cristo. This is the anime version of the classical novel, The Count of Monte Cristo. It's a revenge story about a guy who is fucked over by a politician, his wife gets stolen, and he's sent to prison for like 10 years, and he comes back a totally different guy and starts a revenge plot on all of the filthy politicians who wronged him. The way that the original novel is written is more from the perspective of the Count himself, whereas the anime focuses in on the son of the Count's former wife and the politician Albert, and like him meeting the Count as like this almost vampire, like super charismatic dude who like finds his way into his family and into the social life on Neo Rome, which is on the moon, because this is set 25,000 years in the future with intergalactic travel. And the opening scene, originally like a big festival in Paris, is a big festival on Mars, because anime. And the visual aesthetic is really fucking trippy in this show. It does a lot of that thing where like the patterns remain static while the animation moves over it for it, like individual people's clothes. So like everything looks like a fucking trip. It's really cool. Uses lots of early CGI in experimental ways. The director of this is the guy who ended up doing a lot of visual work on Mad Max Fury Road, as well as the rebuild of Evangelion films from 3.0 onwards. So all that really crazy imagery in there, most likely his doing based on this show. Yeah, worth a watch. How did I get in a bathtub? I'm recommending Kaiji, the Ultimate Survivor. There are 2 seasons of this blistering thriller about a guy with a really sharp nose who ends up saddled with a bunch of a friend's debt that he was signed off on before that friend went and just, like, I think suicided himself or disappeared or something. And so Kaiji ends up being put through this nonstop ringer of mafia games, like basically death games, debt games, if you will, sadistic ploys by mad rich people to get desperate people to do crazy things to try to make money to get out of their debts. It's pretty much what Squid Game seems to be like pulling a lot of influence from. So if you saw that very popular show, you'll probably enjoy Kaiji. Also, most people would probably enjoy Kaiji. It's just really well made and fucking tense. Paranoia Agent was the only TV anime ever directed by the legendary film director Satoshi Kon. And like all of his films, it is a psychological drama with very realistic designs and writing. And each episode explores another character's particular psychosis. You could say this show is like an adaptation of the DSM-5. It's each episode there'll be like an exploration of a character up to the point that they are knocked out by Shonen Bat or Little Slugger, this kid on roller skates with a baseball bat who's been just terrorizing the city, and all these poor folks, all of their lives, right at the moment that they really need an escape from all the pressure that's built up on them. That's when it just so happens the Little Slugger comes along and makes everything good for them for a little while. So as the consequences of that situation pile up, the show gets really trippy and crazy. I don't want to spoil anything, and it's hard to describe the show without doing so, but if you like psychological drama, you cannot go wrong with this one. Next up, from the same director, Satoshi Kon, Perfect Blue was the film that really put his name out there. At the time, Satoshi Kon in the late 80s, early 90s was mostly a manga author and was doing assistant work on, directing films with Katsuhiro Otomo, the guy who created Akira, but he was supposed to make a live-action debut by adapting this novel, Perfect Blue, about an idol who, upon ending her singing career, goes into an acting career that leads her towards doing adult video, and a fan, a psychotic stalker fan who's very upset with the turn that she's taken in her career and is following her through life and murdering people around her who cause her to do things that person doesn't like. It is a really fucked up, horrifying psychological movie that has only gotten more disturbing and prescient for me as I've been into the limelight myself. I'm sure it's something that way more people can relate to even now in the digital age than could have at the time. And this film was very forward-thinking. It addresses technology and the internet in a way that most films from like 96, when I think this came out, wouldn't have been capable of. So yeah, it's aged incredibly well, it looks beautiful, and it will make you feel really afraid. And the last thriller I'm recommending on this part of the list is Steins Gate. This is sort of a sci-fi thriller. It's about a gaggle of nerds living in the nerd capital of Japan, Akihabara, in this little secret base, goofing around, doing little science experiments, when suddenly, through putting a banana in a microwave, they discover accidental time travel. And as they start to figure out the mechanics of what they can do with this very low-level time travel that they found access to, a massive megacorporation called CERN, as in the people who made the Large Hadron Collider, starts coming after them. And basically, it becomes a story of a guy going back in time over and over again, while sending his like statements back in time and his thoughts and memories back in time over and over again to try to save his friends from all being murdered by a huge organization that's way beyond his, you know, capacity to compete with, aside from with the time travel powers. It's really good, really well written, really clever premise, and the characters are really lovable if you are a big schizo nerd. For the next category, it's horror! Just like what I experience when I look in the mirror. Alien 9 is the first horror I'm recommending. This is a 4-episode OVA about 3 elementary school girls who are elected to have these weird alien things put onto their heads, and forced to go, like, round up other aliens that happen to pop up at their school. All these aliens are deadly and have weird, crazy, fucked up powers. And the whole series is just, like, skin-crawling and weird feeling, and it's really well animated. The characters are probably the most, like, convincingly childish and therefore the most, like, convincingly traumatized that I have seen in, like, an anime like this. It gets really trippy in the 4th episode. The OVA ends inconclusively, so if you want the whole story, you'll have to read the 3-volume manga, which I would recommend. It's really good. Everything from that author is pretty good. It's all fucking weird biopunk horror type shit. Next up, I'm recommending Another. This is a novel adaptation that was handled by one of my favorite directors who has been really undercredited for his comedy work and his comedy horror work. And Another falls into the category of what I would consider a comedic horror series. Rather, I would say it's just deeply uncomfortable. It is an experience where the main character is like a newcomer to a foreign town, and he, you know, in meeting everybody and getting to, like, understand the culture surrounding him, it just seems like everybody is haunted and weird, and, like, there's just something wrong with this place and the people in it. And the one, like, outsider person is the only one who even seems to recognize it the same way he does. And so it's like the two of them kind of navigating around this, like, I don't know, open secret of how fucking weird everybody else feels. Everything about the pacing and, like, the way that scenes are staged is just, like, to fuck with you and make you feel anxious and uncomfortable. So it's a weird show, and it has some really hilarious over-the-top death scenes that you probably won't see coming unless you already know about them, but they are usually the reason people watch the show is that they found out about the crazy ass death scenes first. That same director also did over the top, like, comedy horror with Blood Sea, which was a TV show part of the Blood the Last Vampire franchise. And I'm going to first recommend the original film, Blood the Last Vampire. It's like an hour long. It's a really gorgeous film that was meant to basically be a CGI experiment. Production IG and Mamoru Oshii were, like, training people to use new computer graphics technology and, like, lighting and shading and everything. And so the film really, like, pushes all that technology as far as it could go for the time. It looks great. And it was, like, the best looking thing I had seen for a few years when it first came out. But it's a horror film about the last remaining original vampire, a girl named Saya who looks like a teenager but is actually like an ancient vampire. She is sent by the U.S. government onto a, like, U.S. military base inside of Japan during, I think, the Vietnam War, and she's basically hunting down these demonic beasts called chiropterans that are kind of like vampires, but basically they disguise themselves as people, infiltrate, like, a part of society, and then start, like, systematically eating the people around them as they can. And so a couple of them are at this school, and Saya has to hunt them down, and it leads to some really badass action and some really crazy-ass horror scenes. Blood the Last Vampire ended up becoming a really bizarre franchise because it's basically just this character, Saya, being put into, like, different continuities of the same general concept. Like, she hunts chiropterans, but what surrounds her in contextually totally different for each series. So there's a manga, there's a light novel, and there's the 50-episode TV series Blood Plus, which is like an action adventure, like, Full Metal Alchemist style series. that, you know, it looks really good. It's got solid characters. Some really dark, crazy, fucked up stuff happens in it. So it still has like a horror edge. But like ultimately, it's an experience not too unlike watching a Full Metal Alchemist or something like that. So yeah, I would lightly recommend Blood Plus and Blood C if you really enjoyed the tone of a show like Another. If you want to see all of the Blood franchise, there's also a Blood C movie that looks really crazy and was from the guy who ended up directing Psycho-Pass. So yeah, there's a lot to like about the Blood franchise. If you enjoy the original film, dive into it more. Next up, Boogie Pop Phantom. I am a huge fan of the Boogie Pop light novel series, of which 6, I think, have been published in English. And this is sort of an interquel between the first and second books that doesn't really suppose any knowledge on your part about the books. If you have read them, it will add to your understanding of the show, but I had seen this way before I read the books, and most people had because it aired on Tech TV. It is a trippy psychological story set in Tokyo where after a big beam of light, like, just shoots up into the sky one night, a bunch of people end up with crazy special powers. And each episode focuses on a different character, and all of their stories are subtly interconnected, leading up to, like, a final point at which we understand like why all of this stuff is going on. But mostly it's like an episodic horror series about the psychologically manifested powers that each of these characters ends up with as a result of this beam of light. It's really trippy, and it's got a phenomenal soundtrack if you like 90s jungle type music and trance and stuff. Les Portraits de Petite Cosette is a 3-episode OVA from one of my favorite anime directors, Akiyuki Shinbo, known for his really out of control experimental style, and nowhere is that more on display than in this OVA. The best way I can describe it is that it's gothic Lolita, that phrase realized in as truthfully as possible. There's Victorian era gothic storytelling with this young girl who had a portrait painted of her by this obsessive maniac who ended up murdering her, and that portrait ends up in the possession of an arts collector in Tokyo who becomes obsessed with it and ultimately has to like face the core of that obsession through this like supernatural twist where Cosette is like visiting him in visions, and it gets really trippy. I don't want to spoil it, but it's basically a story about how obsession is bad and horror and will lead you to do bad things. And also, it's really gothic and really Lolita. So if you like that aesthetic, you should definitely watch this. Next, I gotta recommend some Devilman. And honestly, your best bet with Devilman is to go read the original manga from the 70s written by Go Nagai. It's 5 volumes long. You can blast through it in an afternoon. And it's really epic and crazy and has an amazing ending and some really truly incredible art in certain places. It's not a 10 out of 10 story all the way through, but it has such a good ending and is such a perfect, like, iconic piece of apocalyptic fiction that it's really left a mark on almost everything that's tried to do something similar since in Japanese media. So Devilman to me is incredibly important. It's like the representative piece of a style that I am like the biggest fan of. And there have been a few attempts to bring it to animation, and none of them to me are totally complete. You've got the original OVA that started in the 80s, and they had 2 episodes adapting pretty much 2 volumes out of 5 of the manga. And that OVA is incredible. It's got fucking monstrously good animation. It's pretty much on point with what's going on in the manga, but elevates it to be cooler and flashier and more insane and grotesque. It's got some of the most like just ridiculous monster fights you'll ever see, some of the goriest action. If you watch it with the dub, it's full of hilarious swearing. So it's a great time. It's just that there's only 2 episodes of it, and they never were able to finish it. The OVA bubble burst. There wasn't enough money to make something like that again. Eventually, we got Devilman Crybaby, and this is Masaaki Yuasa's take. He's a legendary art house director who had just founded his own studio with which to handle a show like this, and did a 13 episode run for Netflix. And I think Devilman Crybaby is excellent. It's a very different take on the story. It has its own sort of agenda. It's hyper modern. It's got like rap songs in it and crazy techno music, and it just takes a totally different aesthetic edge than like the heavy metal 70s and 80s vibe that it had before. And it really works, and it transcended time and made it appeal to a new audience. I think that's great. I don't think it has the same amount of impact in the art that the original had. So even though it still tells pretty much the same story, and it even gives more gravity to certain scenes and certain characters, I didn't feel that the ending was as like remarkably iconic as the manga. Nonetheless, if you don't want to read a 70s manga or you really can't stand Go Nagai's style, I think Devilman Crybaby is a good enough version of the story to consume. But, you know, the manga is still, like, the best. Next up, I'm going to recommend some children's horror. Gegege no Kitaro. This is a series that goes all the way back, I think, to the 60s. It's an iconic character in Japanese comics, Kitaro. He basically is, like, this little kid who talks to spirits and stuff. And often is just kind of helping to solve problems involving spirits for people. Very episodic, very, like... paralleled in stories like Natsume Yujincho or Mushishi, any of these stories that are just about like a person dealing with spirits every episode, probably has its roots in this manga and its many adaptations over the years. The most recent one was from like 2016 and had really slick, up-to-date character designs. The show just looked and sounded great, and you know, I could see watching the whole thing just because I like this tone, this character, this style of urban dark fantasy, even when it's like made for children. And Kitaro is definitely a kids show in almost every adaptation. There are some that like are a little edgier, some that are like really childish, but it's kid-friendly horror with countless episodes and a cast of characters that have been beloved to the Japanese for decades. So probably worth investigating. Next, I have to recommend a really big, really complicated horror franchise adapted from a visual novel series, which is Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, or When They Cry, as it was dubbed in English. This is a show about a group of friends in a remote village called Hinamizawa out in the middle of the Japanese countryside who, on the weekend of a festival, all end up murdering each other. And then suddenly we're back at the start of the festival week again, and then they all end up murdering each other again. And we keep re-experiencing this time loop of these friends hanging out until a point where something transpires to cause them all to murder each other. And as the loop keeps going through again and again, we see different angles of it, different people snapping, learn more stuff about contextually what's going on, and then the characters start to remember things from other timelines, and maybe there's a whole multiversal thing going on here, and it gets really fucking crazy in the second season, and they keep making more of it. So I'm not even fully caught up. I can't even tell you how crazy this temporal loop shit gets, but the characters are pretty easy to like. It's a fun show. It's very memorable for its premise, and a hard not to give a watch just to be like, what in the fuck is going on here? For a little bit of an artsier take on animated horror, I'm recommending Mononoke, which is actually a spin-off of another series I still haven't gotten around to called Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales. One part of that, which is like a bunch of short arcs from different directors with different characters, was about a character called the Medicine Seller. And this is a show about that character. He's a guy walking around in like Edo-era Tokyo, solving magical mysteries, basically, like resolving issues between humans and gods and weird paranormal entities that exist around. But in particular, his methodologies usually involve people having to admit that something they are doing wrong is why the demon is haunting them. And so he's kind of like a psychologist or a detective on his way to being a spirit detective. This show has a really fucking crazy visual style. It looks like nothing else. It's one of the most successful, like, unnerving horror anime just for looking so and sounding as weird as it does. but still has like a visceral satisfaction to it because Medicine Seller is badass and usually like, you know, wins in the end. So they're making a movie out of this soon. I think that's gonna be fucking crazy awesome. Looking forward to that. Red Garden is a really strange show from a Japanese writer-director, Ko Matsuo, who really likes Joss Whedon and like American musicals. So he set a weird anime in New York where people sing their emotions sometimes, and it's about 4 teenage girls fighting zombies in the off time of I think they're like zombies themselves too. Like they're like undead fighting zombies on behalf of rich vampires. On the backdrop of like a very American television-esque like high school drama. It's a strange one, but definitely worth watching if you want to see some like really off-kilter horror with teenage girl protagonists that aren't like anime sexualized. They're like American TV characters. Shiki is basically Salem's Lot by Stephen King, but set in Japan. So there's a small town in the middle of nowhere, and vampires move in, and the people start slowly disappearing and then reappearing. It's a big problem, and eventually it becomes kind of a war. It's a really fucked up psychological horror series. The first half of it is like very slow and very like ironically humorous. A lot of people watch the early episodes and like seethe with hatred towards the characters right up until the moment that like they die satisfyingly, and then you're like, oh, like, well, that made me mad, but now I feel good, and now I don't know how I feel, and like that's kind of the first half, and the second half just makes you feel terrible, but in like an awesome way. So give it a watch. It's an experience. It'll really, it's hard not to hit you with Shiki. I think that's one of the easiest recommendations if you want to be like, what the fuck, that was rough. The last thing I'm recommending in this category is The Soul Taker, which is an experimental transforming hero series that was made by Tatsunoko in collaboration with director Akiyuki Shinbo, whose style again is just completely nuts. And this show is honestly mostly recommendable for the visual style. It just looks crazy. It looks like nothing else. High gothic horror aesthetics applied to like sci-fi settings and characters, with again a transforming hero as the main. The Soul Taker himself is a badass. He's like searching for his lost sister, but in every episode he meets a different clone of her, and they all have like really bizarre relationships with him. So there's like a psychosexual horror aspect, but a lot of it is just like crazy action and like this like evil mega corporation of like medical people like using big like medical satellites to do like dissections on you from space with a laser and kill you and shit. It's wild, man. It's The Soul Taker. Also has my favorite OP ever from Jam Project. Fucking the god tier, the classic, the GOAT. That's it for horror. Wow, now I'm out by the trains, and I'm recommending some comedy shows to you, starting with Arakawa Under the Bridge, which has 2 seasons. It's about a guy who, he was raised by his dad, a businessman, to always repay any favor that is done to him, like to extreme extents. And so when he accidentally almost falls off a bridge and is saved by the homeless woman that lives under it, he's like, my life's in your hands, I'll do anything you want. And she's like, come live with me under the bridge and just be like my partner. And so it becomes a sort of fish out of water comedy, but where a regular person has been dragged into an incredibly bizarre world of eccentric homeless people living under a bridge. It's pretty funny. The openings are legendarily good, both of them, so check that out at the very least. Next up, Bakuan, which also has an OVA, is a comedy about motorcycles. It's sort of like if Kanon and Top Gun got fused into one show, is literally what the concept was of the manga. There's cute girls in high school who have a motorcycle club against all odds or logic. And a lot of the show is really just making fun of how dumb motorcycles are. Like how ridiculous the people into the hobby are, the competitiveness of people who are into different brands. It's very much an embracing, but also a scathing tribute, if you will, to the hobby of being into motorcycles, and anime by extension. So yeah, if you want to see cute girls on motorcycles, and also arguing about motorcycles and making jokes about motorcycles, or just fan culture in general, because I think most of the stuff this show has to say about that applies to any fan culture, you should check this show out. It's hilarious. Barakamon is a comedy series about a young calligrapher who has his work shown in a museum only for an older critic to say that it sucks, and then he punches that guy in the face. And as a result, his dad sends him out to stay on a sort of remote island where you can barely understand what anyone's saying because their accents are so thick, and try to think about life for a while out there. And he ends up befriending a little rambunctious child who, just starts dragging him around to make him do stuff, even though he really just wants to mope around and be a depressed artist about shit. And so it's pretty much the ultimate show about the artist's struggle, both recognizing and ridiculing the pretentious self-involved attitudes of most artists. And it's really good. It's 12 episodes, worth watching. Garzy's Wing was not intended to be a comedy, but if you watch it dubbed, holy shit, it's one of the funniest things you'll ever experience in your life. Garzy's Wing was directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino, the creator of Gundam. It's a side story to a show he did called Aura Battler Dunbine in the 80s. That's basically one of the early isekai stories that also involves mecha. Though there's no mecha in Garzy's Wing. It's about a guy who, on his way to his high school reunion in the modern day, a giant rainbow goose swoops down from the sky and takes his soul, or a part of him out of him, and sends it to ancient Japan. Except it's not ancient Japan, because there's foreigners and dinosaurs, and they use bows and arrows, and his sword is unbelievably dull. And the two Chris's communicate through this bell necklace he has, because his family is runs a shrine. His name is Chris Chiaki, because he's half white, half Japanese, which is why he's connected to both this Western alternate history and Japanese history through Yamato Takeru no Mikoto. And so he gets sent back into the past, and he's thrust into this war between these slave peoples who are revolting, and they're trying to overthrow the government because they heard a prophecy about Garzy's Wing showing up, and wouldn't you know it, Chris shows up naked with big fucking glowing wings coming out of his feet, because he has Garzy's Wing, or is Garzy's Wing, I don't know. His sword is so fucking dull. Basically, this thing is incomprehensible madness, and the dub, the writing and acting is preposterously bad in a way that makes it incredibly hilarious. Highly recommended. If you want a sample of it, there's a video called, well, there's a few actually videos on YouTube. If you just look for, Garzy's Wing Comedy Gold, you'll find little clip packages of some of the funnier moments from this OVA. But I think it's worth sitting through at least the first 15 minutes of the first episode, just to be what the fuck am I experiencing? Detroit Metal City is a show about the Metal Devil and how you cannot suppress him from deep within. Our main character, Anishi, is a sweet boy who just wants to listen to Swedish pop music to impress this girl he wants to bang, but inside of him is Krauser II, the just god of heavy metal. And this show is full of fucking really legit death metal music, all of it with hilarious, over-the-top, ridiculous lyrics. It's very edgy. If you don't like edgy humor, like the main character's superpower being that he can say rape 11 times in 1 second, then you might not enjoy this show. But it's lots of just gross out hijinks humor. Most of it's based on funny words and heavy metal music. If you like metal, you'll probably like Detroit Metal City. It's an easy recommendation for fans of the genre. Good Fairies, spelled GD Fairies, has 2 seasons and is one of the more unconventional anime comedies on this list. It's about these 3 little CGI cute little fairy girls who sit around a table and have small talk at the start of each episode. And then they go and look into this like reflection pool where the actresses just basically have improvised reactions to whatever they watch on these like bizarre, hilarious 3D videos. And there's also segments where the fairies go into like inside of this like treehouse they live in. There's like a virtual room where they can make anything happen, and they play these like crazy games. It's hard to describe what's funny about this show. You'll probably know if you like it or not pretty quickly, and a lot of people don't, but if it clicks with you, highly recommend watching all of it. It only gets funnier. Gekkan Shoujo Nozaki-kun, or Monthly Girls' Nozaki-kun, is a show about a young girl in high school who loves to death this manga, and she ends up meeting the guy who draws it, who turns out to be another student in her class at high school. And so she ends up becoming his assistant while in an effort to trying to confess her love to him, because she feels like he must have this like incredible depth of understanding of romance and women because of the fact that he writes these beautiful things in his stories. But the way that he acts in his personal life is like absolutely mercenary, and he doesn't care about anything but working on manga. So like he seems to have like no even signal of recognizing emotion or romance or any attempt to get his attention. He only sees things through the lens of how it will help him to create manga. So it's basically just this girl desperately throwing herself at this guy to no avail. My next recommendation is one of my favorite anime of all time and one of the most monolithic of recent years, the biggest comedy anime I can think of, Gintama. Gintama is the story of what if in the middle of Japan's Edo period in like the late 1800s, a bunch of aliens invaded from all over space. And so now there's just total chaos in the streets and anything is possible. The main character, Gintoki, is a retired samurai from back in the war who now is just trying to run like an odd jobs business. So basically, him and his couple of friends, they'll just take on whatever gig comes their way. And that can mean anything. Gintama it's hard to describe because on the one hand, a lot of the time it's just doing genre parody. It's like taking something that already exists, making it funny. But sometimes it's so unconventional or so multi-layered or so metatextual with the way it does that it just doesn't feel like anything else. There are episodes where if I tried to describe them, they wouldn't sound funny because the only thing that's funny about it is the context of the fact that it's happening inside the show at the moment it's happening. And the real power of Gintama that takes people for surprise is that it can do serious dramatic arcs just as well as any other show. So every once in a while, it'll just start building into a serious arc for like 4 or 5 episodes, and it'll hit all the beats of like a major story arc that would normally take a show like dozens of episodes to get to. And it'll do all that and like this continual ramp up while still like breaking aside and being funny every now and then, and just totally fucking with your head where like some crazy violent thing will happen and then like something breaks the fourth wall in a way that like it doesn't like add levity to the situation, but actually like will make it even more intense comedically. So it's just a show that's like constantly fucking with you, constantly testing limits of what it can get away with, and really pushing boundaries in a way that I don't think another show that I've seen has. So yeah, Gintama is like, it's the comedy anime for all intents and purposes. Gintama also has tons and tons of movies and OVAs. I haven't even really gotten started in a way. Like, I've seen 160 episodes. That sounds like a lot. I mean, that's all of Ranma 1/2. That was like the longest show I ever finished. So I've seen as much of it as the longest show I've ever finished. I just haven't seen all of it because there's so goddamn fucking much of it. There's just so much Gintama. It just won't, like, it did end, but it wouldn't end. You don't understand, it wouldn't end. But now it did, so I guess I have no excuse. Go watch Gintama. Now we're in the comedy kitchen. And the next one I'm recommending is Great Teacher Onizuka, or GTO. This is a story about a guy who was once a punk growing up in the streets of Tokyo, and then he took a while off in America, learned English, came back to Japan, and signs up to be an English teacher, basically so that he can bang high school girls, is his hope. He's kind of a sleazy fuck, and he really doesn't give a shit about anything except doing what he wants. But he gets put in charge of the delinquent class. Everyone in his class has some kind of fucked up problem going on in their life, and basically he is moved as their teacher to try to do something about it in his own surly, over-the-top way. So it's ultimately a show about this teacher, being the best influence these tormented children need in their lives. But his methods are unorthodox, like taking a sledgehammer to a kid's wall to break down the door between her parents or something like that. It's fun stuff. It's a good comedy, good heartfelt comedy show. Ichigo Mashimaru, or Strawberry Marshmallow, is a show about 4 cute little girls doing cute stuff. It's a very dry comedy. Honestly, the manga is extremely dry, and I think it's a little bit longer. It's somewhat funnier. The anime really does a great job of creating like a lived-in world and some sense of believability, and the characters feel a little bit more nuanced maybe than in the manga. Mostly it's about the hijinks of one of the 4 main girls, Miyu, being like a Cartman type and always trying to fuck with everybody else and like create scenarios that lead to hilarity. But it's all so like benign and everyday. It's hard to really describe it as much more than like a slice of life comedy with some adorable elementary school kids. It's just fucking cute. The character, the older sister character, Nobue Ito, is one of my anime soul sisters. So I've always connected with the show just on how much I like that character and connect with her, and then watching the kids get up to their hijinks. It's adorable and it's funny. Inferno Cop is one of the most slapdash anime comedies you'll ever see. It's very similar to the Adult Swim shows that like a 12-ounce mouse or something that just uses as little animation as possible as part of the joke. So Inferno Cop has like 2 or 3 character designs. They're not animated. They just kind of stay in one static pose, but they move around. They're animated in the sense that like they are puppeted, but they are like 2D puppets, like stick puppets, is the way they're treated by the animation. And each episode is only like 2 or 3 minutes long, but it's just a bunch of preposterous, over the top, hilarious gags about this cop who's got a skull, like a flaming skull head, like Ghost Rider. And at one point he goes to hell, and it's good. You just got to watch it, drink it in. It was one of the first things Trigger did when they were first establishing themselves. And I think they had like a rule or something. They weren't allowed to spend more than like an hour working on it each episode. So yeah, it's pretty rambunctious. Next, I'm recommending Kamichu. This is a show about a middle school girl who suddenly becomes a god, sort of the god of middle school girls as a concept, because in Japan, in the Shinto religion, there is a belief that there is a god in everything, and this show basically literalizes that by suggesting that there's like 8 million gods that like just represent every like object or concept that we have, and all of them get together for meetings and stuff, and they have like various powers that they can use to affect the world around them, particularly things that are related to their power. So this girl, like, she just kind of wakes up one day and, you're the god of middle school girls. What does that mean? Pretty much just keep being a middle school girl, and every once in a while, weird shit's gonna happen around you. And that's where it goes. It's mostly like a slice of life comedy about girls just hanging out, living in like this beautiful seaside town in semi-rural Japan, and occasional crazy stuff happening. There's one episode where the main character's cat joins a cat fight club, and it's a whole fight club thing. So Yeah, it's adorable. It's great. It's really well animated. The writers and directors have done a bunch of other great stuff. So if you like it, look into anything else they've done. Very creative. Konosuba has been one of the biggest broad popular anime comedies of recent years. This is a show. It starts off as a standard isekai main character. He's trying to throw himself in front of a truck, but it actually turns out it was a tractor, and he wasn't saving anybody, and he actually died from pissing himself in fright. Not even from getting hit, and the goddess takes him to another world where they're supposed to save the day, but they end up basically realizing that they are chumps and that they just need to like work and have an everyday life in this town. They never make any progress. They spend most of their time just slumming around, and then occasionally accidentally ending up killing like one of the 4 generals of the evil guy that's ruling the world. So you get the sense that they might complete their adventure eventually, but mostly through haphazard circumstance as they dick around. You know, the main character, Kazuma, he's just kind of like a perverted, like, schlubby dude who doesn't really have much ambition. He's just kind of guided by whatever's in front of him. Aqua, the goddess, is a dumb brat. She's fucking hilarious because she's so stupid and so... she's lovable in spite of the fact that she's just like a totally self-serving, totally mean-spirited, like, bad things happen to her, and it's funny because she deserves it, and that's a big part of that character. And then you got Megumin, the girl who just wants to blow shit up. She's just obsessed with explosions. She's the cute one that everybody cosplays. And Darkness, the pain slut. She just wants pain for pleasure. And that's the show. It's these 4 dorks slumming around fantasy world. It's easily the most fun isekai anime, so I recommend it highly. It's got a few seasons, got a movie. All of it's worth checking out. I'm green now. Kurage Hime is pretty much the ultimate femcel anime. It's a story about a nerdy girl who moves into a apartment complex full of nerdy girls, all of whom have basically decided that they've cut themselves out of the dating pool, and they're all like totally in on their own personal weird obsessions, whatever they're an otaku for. But one of those girls ends up meeting I guess I'll call them a non-binary character. I'm not really clear where they're meant to stand on the gender spectrum, if you will. But this character is assigned male at birth, presents female much of the time, and while not considering themselves like a trans woman, nonetheless starts entreating the main girl into the world of being more feminine, basically showing her like, hey, you can, wear these outfits and do this stuff like for fun because you want to, not because it's like a societal pressure that you need to force yourself into. And so the show ends up becoming about their relationship, the relationships they have with the people in their lives, and trying to break out of the femcel bubble, basically. It's a good show. Doesn't have really a conclusion, though. You have to read the manga to get, more. Kyodan Kazoku Nikki is a light novel adaptation that is about... Well, it's about a family that the government puts together of a government agent as the father, the universe's rather most dangerous criminal as the wife, and then 4 or 5 other alien criminals as the children. Basically, all of them come from broken homes, and this bureau has decided that it thinks that if they formed a family unit, it's possible they might all be redeemable or controllable, functional within society. And so it's the story of this bizarre family of, basically relatively normal dad, absolutely out of control, goddare, power hungry, madcap, cat girl waifu wife. And then one of the kids is a jellyfish that's psychic. One of them is a robot, like a 3-year-old robot with feelings. And then there's a lion and a talking lion. And then, just a cute little girl, but she comes from, the most evil family in the world. And she's all, fucked up and scarred from all the abuse that she's taken all her life. And then her older sister, who was one of her abusers, but then becomes the victim of the family after the little girl leaves. And so she also ends up joining the Kyoran Kazoku. It's a really fun show. It follows sort of an arc structure. It doesn't go very far by the end of the anime, and I don't really know if the light novels have ever even been fan translated, so it's kind of limited with how much story you get out of it. But I like the characters, I like the concept a whole lot, and I like the weird tonality of the show. It constantly switches between being like really harshly dramatic and really funny, depending on, well, I guess how harshly you feel about the dramatic things that go on. Next, I'm recommending anime's most misunderstood horror comedy, Mayoiga. This is a show that starts off with 30 weirdos from the internet all meeting to get on a bus to drive out to the middle of nowhere to try to like start a new society together. And none of them has any idea how to even function in a society in the first place, so this doesn't go very well. And there's sort of a murder mystery going on, like, with everybody there, but the, like, what's actually happening, I don't want to describe anything without spoiling it, but it constantly subverts the expectations of a horror fan. It's like setting you up to think that something horrifying is going to happen, and it always ends up being something dumb or comedic. And a lot of people really thought, like, oh, I don't get it. Like, it's not scary. It's a comedy show. It's a comedy show for a very particular type of person. So you'll know if you like it pretty much within the first 5 minutes, and if you don't get it, just walk away. You'll get it some other day, maybe. Minami K is a series about 3 sisters who have no parental guidance. One's elementary, one's middle, and one's high school. And it's just about the hijinks that go on in their house and with the people that they're friends with. The middle child is kind of a rambunctious bully. The elementary schooler's like the sly one who's always at war with the middle schooler. And the eldest sister's like the motherly kind one. If you just want to see like nice, suburban, cutesy, fun, you know, comedic hijinks, there's lots of like gender play that goes on with the side characters, bunch of cross-dressing and stuff like that. Very minor explorations of those kinds of themes, but yeah, it's a pretty fun show, and it had a bunch of seasons. Mitsudo Moe is a show that will probably make some people uncomfortable. It follows 3 elementary school girls who are triplets. One of them is like a sadist. One of them is obsessed with boobs and loves to fight. And the other one is just like stay the fuck back, or else I will eat you. And it's about the 3 of them terrorizing their teacher and the people around them as just, you know, terrible triplets. It's very raunchy for being a show about elementary schoolers, but it has like an attitude almost like a Garbage Pail Kids attitude. It just doesn't give a fuck, and it's really funny. If you end up clicking with this show, it's got 2 seasons. I think it's worth it. Welcome to the NHK is a comedy show only in as much as it is a long, hard look in the mirror for anyone who has stuck themselves in their room and distanced themselves from society. It's a show about a guy who has been locked in his room for the last 4 years and is losing his fucking mind. He's just going in like a paranoid schizophrenic spiral. His next door neighbor won't stop listening to anime music, so he finally busts into that guy's room, and that guy's just a hardcore otaku going to animation college. They both hate women and scream about it a lot in their room while wishing they could get pussy. They try to make a video game together. That goes nowhere for like 12 episodes. There's a whole lot of arcs. Basically, this was based on a light novel that was actually pretty short and depressing, and they added a lot more comic hijinks into the 26 episode show, as well as some like sub arcs that kind of reinforced essential themes. I think it's a really great anime. I think a lot fewer people would connect with the story if it was just the harrowingly depressing light novel that's just about like doing drugs and losing your mind in your room. So yeah, the anime is the more accessible version, but if you're somebody who doesn't know how to step through the threshold of the front door of your life, this show's all about that. And it won't necessarily give you answers. The author himself continued to be a hikikomori after the success of his series, so you know, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Nichijou is the word that literally means ordinary life in Japanese, and of course it is anything but. The manga is mostly like sort of just an ordinary life school comedy that occasionally like flits into the realm of the absurd or surreal, where like a student might just be walking around her school and suddenly there's a deer in the courtyard, and then the principal is sumo wrestling the deer in the middle of the courtyard, or suplexing it is the word I meant to use, suplexing a deer in the middle of the courtyard, and you just kind of watch that happen and have to sit with it, and that's the emotional tone of the manga. The anime adaptation from Kyoto Animation really ramps up the animation as the joke in and of itself. Like, basically it'll create situations where the animation keeps getting more and more intense and frenetic to reflect the like weirdness of a situation going off the rails from the ordinary life. So, it's kind of a sensory experience. A lot of the comedy is just in the way that the show is animated. If you're the type of person who likes to see like animation comedy in the vein of like a Looney Tunes or something, but reimagined in a very different way through the lens of like Japanese, animation history, it's a really fun show for that. Oh boy. Nia Under 7 is a difficult show to describe. I'm hesitant to even call it a comedy. It comes from the same writer and creator as Haibane Renmei and Serial Experiments Lane, and basically it was just like some concepts that he was drawing in like an art book that his producer liked and said, let's make a show out of that. And they wanted to make something more lighthearted after having done Lane, but they didn't really succeed at that. It's a very melancholy show for being a comedy. A lot of the things that a lot of the comedy it pulls is now seen as kind of racy. It's not exactly a politically correct show, let's put it that way. So even people who've gone back and like found something to enjoy about it are also kind of trying to cancel it at the same time. So I don't know. Your mileage will definitely vary with this one, but it's an extremely strange show about a version of Japan where aliens have invaded and they have this really rigid caste system. The main character, Nia, is like the bottom caste, an under 7, if you will. And so all the aliens hate her, and she's kind of a huge fucking brat, so no one really feels much need to treat her better than like the way that the caste system already does. And it's she lives in this house with a broke-ass college student who's basically just like trying to find any reason to go on living, and struggling at that. And there's really not much of a conclusion. It's just kind of an existential ennui type show for broke college students to feel bad about life, I guess. But have a laugh along the way. It's still a comedy, I promise. Penny Pony Dash is kind of a hard show to recommend because of the fact that it is so Japanese and so deeply instilled with cultural references that that there's actually, on the American DVD release, they did this thing called 80 vid notes where they have like little pop-ups come up on screen to explain the joke to you. And when you watch it with that, it's just constant. It's just like, this is a show where a 10-year-old professor is teaching a class full of idiots in Japanese high school, but like metatextually reality is breaking around them at every second. So like the school itself is like presented as a stage. This is a difficult show to describe because visually it's fucking almost incoherent, and there's like text on the chalkboards telling one joke in the background at the same time as characters are telling another joke in the dialogue type shit, characters talking over each other, doing two different references at the same time. It's a hard show to parse, and a lot of people will probably be entertained just by getting like 1 in 10 of the jokes or references the show's making. Like, that's enough to kind of make you go like, this is a fun time. But man, it's hard to understand. Plastic Nason is an ultra short series. The entire thing compiled is 30 minutes and you can find it on YouTube. I recommend just tab right over, watch that, and come back. Honestly, it's my go-to. Here's a quick, completely stupid anime comedy that will just I don't want to even describe anything because it's so short that like I would be ruining a joke to talk about it. Just go watch it. You'll either laugh or you won't. It's simple as that. Haven't You Heard I'm Sakamoto is a show about a guy called Sakamoto who is perfect. He is completely infallible. He doesn't even see himself that way, no. He's humble. He's everything you want him to be. Somehow he will find a way to fit into your life in a way that you need him to. He's like an all-purpose utensil for everyone around. And most of the people who are most drawn to him are the ones who want to fuck with him. They're like, it's too good to be true. There's no way someone could help me. But then he fucking finds a way to do it. That's Sakamoto. He finds a way to help your ass. He just can't help himself but to help you. It's like the only way he can help himself is to help you. Sakamoto, he's the ultimate guy. It's impossible to watch this show. And like, if you come away not liking him, it just means that you doubt the power that resides within you to be a Sakamoto yourself. Oh shit. Go watch that show. Yeah, these are the hardest ones to like describe and it sound like anything at all.
Alright, there you go.
Alright, yeah, I'm like trying to fathom how I'm going to describe Cromartie High School. Cromartie High School is a show about a delinquent high school where all the delinquents really deep down are like just misunderstood, you know, and they're all trying to understand each other, but they're too lost in their thoughts all the time. One of the characters is a robot called Mekazawa, and he's got the voice of Norio Wakamoto, one of my favorite voice actors. The guy with the super deep rumbling type voice, you know. Lelouch's dad, that guy. He's a mecha in this, and it's really fucking funny. Also, Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury is just there. He's just at Cromartie High School. He doesn't say anything. He just poses and like is Freddie Mercury about it. It's a beacon of light to all the troubled students at Cromartie High. But they're all suffering, and it's all on the inside, all in the Cromartie High School. Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei, one of my personal favorite comedy shows, mostly for its trippy aesthetic brought about by director Akiyuki Shinbo's studio Shaft, really just giving their all to a show that by all rights shouldn't exist. It's one of the darkest satires, one of the just grimmest, blackest comedies to ever come out of manga, and I don't know how it was even successful enough to get 3 seasons of anime and several OVAs and a bunch of tie-in music that's really, really good. But it's the story of a teacher who just wants to die. All he wants to do is kill himself. Every day he thinks of some reason, some dumb, minute reason about society that pisses him off and sends him in a frenzy, and he's like, I have to die today. And then he ends up being confronted by a student of his named Kafka, who will put a positive spin on absolutely everything she sees. So when she sees her teacher trying to kill himself by hanging, she's like, you must be trying to grow taller. That's the only reason you do something like that. There's no reason you would ever want to kill yourself. That's just ridiculous. You must just be trying to grow taller. And when faced with that logic, he just doesn't want to kill himself anymore. And so it's a constant going through the motions of every episode. This teacher is upset about something, and everyone in his class has some kind of mental illness. So there's the obsessive-compulsive girl, there's the stalker, a hikikomori, just a bunch of people who have some kind of, like, social dysfunction, and when Sensei has a problem with society, each of them has their own version of that same problem that he has, but it upsets him that their version is different from his, and he's like, no, that's not the way you're supposed to be upset about it. You're supposed to be upset about it this way. And so it becomes an argument between him and the class until the point at which Kafka, who just sees everything in a positive light to the extent that it pisses everyone else off, they're all just like, no, well, I don't even know how to argue with you. You're impossible. And so the episode rolls on, and now you're in another one. It's a really, really good show. It's got a crazy twist ending, and you should watch it. The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is a hard anime to talk about without talking about the cultural context around it, because it's a good show. It might even be a great show, but more importantly, it's tremendously influential for the fact that it was the first like light novel adaptation to really have like an incredible adaptation that was so like weird and marketed so perfectly that it just like caught on like wildfire and everybody was paying attention to it. And in the wake of it, it became like a standard setter for like the level of animation quality, the level of thought that would have to be put into like producing a light novel adaptation or something that was meant to be about like cute girls being cute in high school. Like even just doing like the sexual hijinks element, Haruhi did it to the absolute like extreme. You know, it did everything with perfect animation, with perfect class, and it just sort of raised the bar for its genre. So looking at it as an individual work, it feels more dated and sort of benign now because so much has come out that like just directly did the same fucking thing that it did. And you know, it's hard to appreciate. I mean, I would say if you can make it all the way through the movie, you know, there's 2 seasons in a film. The disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya is really where it gets meta narrative and stuff. Like there's like a lot of fourth dimensional storytelling going on in this show. I haven't even really started describing the plot, but it's about a high school girl who is God and the alien time traveler and Esper, who are all trying to convince her. Like, they're basically all trying to entertain her without letting her know that she actually is God. Like, she thinks she's God, and she is God, but they don't want her to actually know she's God. So they're all, like, trying to manipulate reality around her to make her life feel like an anime without letting her know that, like, she can do literally whatever she wants. And none of them can like prove she can't. So as far as they're concerned, that is like equivalent to her being God. And it's just about all the wacky hijinks that surround that character and that premise. But when you get to the movie, because one of the other characters is an alien who's part of the data integrated thought entity, a giant cloud somewhere in space collected of like all these consciousnesses somewhere that, you know, is as good as the basically being the ultimate universe super calculator, you know, embodied in Yuki, this little alien girl. She starts like experiencing time fourth dimensionally, trying to cope with like having feelings in a world where maybe like, I don't know, Haruhi wants her to have feelings or something. I don't remember what the point of that movie was, honestly. I just remember it being fucking crazy. So yeah, if you make it all the way through Haruhi, it's worth it. But you just got to remember that like anything that feels like it was only possible because it already happened. Take Q is a series of 2-minute comedy episodes. You could watch 2 of them right now and you will know if this show is for you or not, because it's completely ADHD, spastic insanity. It's hard to read all the subtitles, quite honestly. They speed up the dialogue. They speed up the voice actresses so that they can cram even more into the incredibly tiny space they have. There are 13 episodes a season and like 9 seasons. So you could just like spend all day rotting your fucking brain trying to wrap it around what the hell is going on in Take You. Okay. Tokyo Godfathers is a film about 3 homeless people in the streets of Tokyo who find a baby and they got to figure out, what are we going to do with this fucking baby? It's a really sentimental comedy film at heart. It's a Christmas movie, a movie about faith and belief, about the great magnet, the whims of God, if you will, guiding these people through a night that basically at every step of the way they are announcing their intentions and what they need to do, and then none of that happens. Something will always completely take them in a different direction, and it's always about this just ongoing like way that they end up wrapping up all of their personal conflicts and all the things that are, you know, basically all the character arcs are concluded by the end of this very spectacular Christmas night by the whims of God. So it's a nice, charming, feel-good movie about some very down-on-the-luck people living in Tokyo. You should give it a watch. It's from Satoshi Kon, one of the absolute masters. Rest in peace. And, yeah, okay, that's enough. Watamote is the ultimate self-reflective otaku cringe comedy. It's about a young femcel named It's about a young femcel named Kuroki Tomoko, and basically she's incredibly awkward and she gets everything wrong all the time. And that's pretty much it. It's just a show about a very awkward high school girl. And she falls into the traps of being into anime, and she's probably just a lesbian, but can't figure that out. It's the femcel experience writ large. The number of people who have just literally made this character is the most of any anime I've ever seen. This is like the Joker for girls who like anime. That's the best sell I can give you. Watamote is the Joker for girls who like anime. Okay. Aggressive Retsuko, or Agretsuko, is a Netflix series adapting a Sanrio character, the Hello Kitty people, except it's a death metal... Oh, God, she's a red panda. It's a death metal red panda, and her thing is that she's just a regular office lady, just a regular old Japanese office lady, except that when she... goes to when all her anger builds up from everything at work, all the frustrations finally mount and the tension builds, and then she goes to karaoke and she does death metal and lets it all out. And basically it's just about it's pretty much a word. I've got a whole video about this show on my channel. I go into extreme depth talking about all the character arcs and all the deeper side of the show. So if you really want to get in depth with it, I've got a long analytical video about it. But otherwise, this is an easy show to recommend. It's cute. It's simple. It's on Netflix. It's only like 10 minutes per episode. So yeah, if you've ever worked in a place, you'll probably relate to this show. Oh, God. Backstreet Dolls Goku Dolls is an anime I can only recommend to certain people. And you probably need to have a certain amount of body dysmorphia to get this joke, and a certain amount of self-hatred to think it's funny. But basically, it's about 3 Yakuza who fuck up, and their boss sends them off to Thailand to be turned into women so that they can perform as an idol group. So it's about 3 guys, 3 extremely tough dude bros being forced through gender reassignment surgery, and about all the dysmorphia that they now feel as women, or as men trapped in women's bodies, rather. Then there's also the moments where they realize, like, the benefits of femininity, and it just sort of like breaks down their idea of like the division between the two, and the idea that they had to be this hyper masculine person that they thought they had to be before becoming a literal fucking idol singer. But then they're idol singers about being gangsters, so it's like they kind of had to have been gangsters to sing about being gangsters in the first place. I think it's a pretty deep show. I think it has a lot of empathy for people like me, and I think that there are a lot of people like me who think that the show is making fun of them, and like will hate it or disregard it because they think like, oh, this show is like making fun of trans people. No. This show could only have been written by somebody who understands gender dysphoria. Like, it's just, you couldn't write a show like this without understanding it well enough to make this type of humor out of it. So I thought the show was fucking hilarious, personally. It looks like sin, and that's part of the joke, but, you know, it's going to be repellent for some people. It's always funny to me when people will look at an ugly comedy and be like, it looks ugly, I don't want to watch it. It's like, that's probably why it's funny, though, is that it looks ugly. So, you know, check it out if you don't mind the premise. Okay. I never properly introduced that I was in the workplace comedies section. It's fine. Okay. Hataraki Man, or Working Man, ironically, is a anime adaptation of a manga about a working woman, a hardworking, oh man. It's a workplace comedy about what it means to be an office lady in Japan. It's really not much more complicated than that. I have to assume it's about as true to life as it could be because it feels incredibly mundane. Mainly, it's about all these stresses piling up for this lady until the point at which on the weekend she can maybe see her boyfriend for like an hour or maybe get a massage for like an hour. And otherwise, her life is just a unending, searing hell of trying to meet people's expectations for the sake of being the working man. And she's not even a man about it. So it's like, wow. Hataraki Man. Moyoko Anno wrote this, the wife of Hideaki Anno. All of her manga are worth reading. You should check them out. I'm always trying to figure out like what level of being realistic and how I describe the show sounds like a recommendation, you know? New Game is a show about a bunch of cute girls working at a game development studio, making an RPG. Mostly it's about flirting and lesbian hijinks and just, you know, what if game development was a bunch of cute girls going through like a little bit of crunch instead of just like hell of what it actually is. That's the premise. Take it or leave it. My personal favorite workplace comedy is Shirobako, the anime about making anime, the ultimate love letter to the entire medium. Most of the characters in this show are analogs for real-world people who work in the animation industry, with the exception of the five main girls who start off as bright young high schoolers ready to jump into making anime, and they make their own like production with just the five of them all by themselves, and they're like, we can't wait to be a part of the industry together. And then it like snaps to 2 years into them all being in the industry, and it's not been kind to them. The industry, well, frankly, the industry is not kind to itself. And that's sort of what the anime is about. It's about why the people involved in doing it continue doing it in spite of how difficult it is to do it, the environment around doing it, the types of people you have to deal with when you do it. In spite of all that, people keep doing it. It's actually insane. And that's what this anime is about. Sore ga Seiyu is a show... Sore ga Seiyu is a show about 3 young voice actresses getting into the voice acting industry. It's pretty straightforward. Again, like Shirobako, which I highly recommend watching before this, honestly. This is sort of like is a show that exists because that one already exists, and now it's like splintering off from being about anime in general to being about voice acting and really fleshing out that whole sphere of anime culture. I guess if you're into voice acting, if you're into seiyuu, this is actually the one to go to first. I shouldn't be so presumptuous as to suggest that anime is broadly more important than just voice acting. It might be that voice acting is your passion and this is the show for you. It goes into extensive detail about how the industry works in Japan. Lots of established actors come up as cameos in the show. So yeah, it's a pretty fun time. It's nothing that's gonna like blow your mind with its writing, but it's a really fun escapade into the world of Japanese voice acting. Tonkatsu DJ Agetaro is a hilarious series of 10-minute short episodes of 12... Tonkatsu DJ Agetaro is a short series of 12 10-minute episodes about a kid named Agetaro who works at a tonkatsu shop, basically a little Japanese pop-up stand where they make fried pork cutlets. And he really doesn't have much concept of life outside having like just gone to high school and worked with his parents at this food place. And so he starts getting interested and involved in DJ culture and the club scene and everything that he sees in that culture. He ends up like reverse applying how his experiences working as a tonkatsu chef, can translate to being a DJ. And so the whole thing is this like gradation of tonkatsu becomes DJ Agetaro. Also, it has a really awesome soundtrack. I've had a few where I'm like, I look at it and I'm like, can I still in good conscience recommend this? Like, not about the messages, I just don't stand by that you should fucking watch these anime. Like, nobody should watch 420 anime. Like, this fuck.
That's not no. The video ends here. Why don't you turn it off?
Otherwise, I mean, we already reached like the number I had already hit before of 250, probably, which was like the point of the video was that it was 7 hours of anime recommendations. You could just go to my anime list, fucking sort it by rating, and watch the things that are the most popular.
Right back into the video. No cuts.
I cannot bring myself to recommend you 420 anime. There aren't that many anime that you should watch. There just simply aren't. There's a list in the description of all the anime I was going to recommend. Some of them, there's not footage of me recommending that you'll notice, oh, you passed over this, you never talked about this. That's why I gave up. I even in the list I made, I'm passing over things, and I'm like, can I really tell someone to go spend their time on this? I would rather you went outside. I really would. Like, go talk to any other person. It'll do more for you than watching 420 anime. There are some really good anime. You could find them really easily. Like, fucking Google is your friend. It is all I do to recommend you anime is go to my anime list and sort by the fucking rating tab, and then, like, it's how anyone does SEO on anime. I just don't understand. Can't you just do it yourself? Can't you just go find the anime you want to watch? Can't you usually tell just by looking? You can usually tell within, like, a second if you want to watch a show or not. Stop watching shows you don't want to watch. Stop trying to make up excuses for why you have to watch other shit. You don't gotta watch nothing. If it looks pretty, fucking go look at it. I don't know. You don't need permission to watch anything. Just go watch it. Or don't. Fucking Jesus. Alright. All the anime are still down there if you want them, though. Because I know you do.
That's perfect.